Year after year, one thing has remained constant: our goal to ensure meaningful economic development and uplift the lives of the people we serve. Amid the changes, we continue what we've set out to do. We believe in an enterprise that reflects our culture, our values, our core. We take inspiration from our past. And usher in a new era of progress. Our balanced pursuit for financial gains and sustainability reflects our rich history and our fruitful journey. And shows our commitment to the country's future. The difference we make defines the work we do. Every time we energize our cities, fulfill the dreams of the many, forge genuine partnerships, connect ideas, design experiences, and solve our toughest challenges. We drive change for a better world. By staying rooted in our values and understanding the community's needs, we are able to create an impact that is felt beyond borders. A change that transcends generations. A legacy that will stand the test of time. And as we conquer new horizons, we look back to where it all started. From a small town in the Visayas, to our journey to become global, we will remain at the helm. Our next century defined by how we break conventions, rethink the usual, and push the boundaries of possibility. Because our business is your story of firm foundations, purposeful growth, and a future that we share. Aboitiz, 100 years of advancing business and communities.
A better future is built by the brave, envisioned by brilliant minds, born from the passions of thousands strong. One that isn't without risk, but protected from it. Safe from all the worries and secure for what's to come. Because a better future with the greatest empires, the strongest communities, and the happiest families will always be worth having. That's why the bold and the fearless understand that recreating something better takes courage and strength. So together, let's start shaping a better future today. Recreate a braver tomorrow.
A warm welcome to our global audience. My name is Quintin Pastrana, President of We Energy Power Pilipinas, and your moderator for today. Let's just have a few reminders before we begin. Today, we're going to be using the Zoom webinar platform brought to us by Globe. We are also broadcasted by Facebook Live. This session will be recorded for our documentation. We may use portions of it for ABAC materials, such as posting on our website, abac.ph. Guests have to sign in through the link that we sent to the email address you provided in your registration form. Please ensure that your display name is in the organization first name, last name format. Your microphones and cameras will be automatically turned off as you come in. You may send your questions or feedback by typing them in the Q&A box. If you wish to ask a question, you may click the raise hand button provided by Zoom. If recognized, your mic and video will be turned on. Please state your name and organization before asking your question. To allow more time for discussion, please make your questions brief and direct. And finally, please do fill out the feedback form you will receive as you exit the webinar. Thank you very much. Let's now begin. Welcome to the ABAC Philippines Forum, the Digital Innovation for Economic Recovery and Resilience. This webinar is brought to you by ABAC Philippines in partnership with Aboitiz and the support of Globe Business. Now, we have over 200 guests in attendance in the Zoom webinar, plus the Facebook viewers, with representatives from the government, including the LGUs and the private sector from the Philippines and across the APEC region. We also have friends from the media, and we welcome you all here today. Let me also acknowledge the Philippine representatives to the APEC Business Advisory Council, or ABAC. Joan De Asis, Sabina Aboitiz, Bill Luz, Francis Chua, and ABAC Philippines Chair, Tomas Alcantara. Let me first begin by setting the tone for today. Make no mistake, this is a clarion call for action. The IMF outlook for this annus horribilis of 2020 shows that globally, we're expected to eke out no more than negative 4.9%, which is already 2% lower than initially forecasted last April. Negative 0.8% for emerging and developing Asia. Now, within that set of regional players, the Philippines is expected to eke out negative 7% growth by year end. Certainly half of what we experienced in the second quarter, and yet no more than a challenge for us in terms of where we have to go together. But zooming in on the Philippines, here are the figures across the board to take note of. The unemployment rate has tripled from 5 to 17% within the first half of the year alone. Indicators across the board, from manufacturing to consumption to exports, and even OFW remittances are down by double digits and with a continuous slide. Now, while the slippage and situation is somewhat eased, the country, and indeed the region and the world, is far from a steady state, and much more needs to be done. In order for a sustained recovery to occur, the burden of managing a transition, indeed a painful but necessary transformation into a digital inclusive economy where no citizen, MSME, or institution is left behind, needs to be shared between the public and private sector. While the government sets a tone and provides the environment for critical investment and innovation for the private sector to occur. On this note, we now begin our forum. To give his welcome message, may I call on the chairman of ABAC Philippines, Tomas Alcantara. Just bear with us for a few minutes. We will sort out these issues.
Can I start?
Yes, Chairman Alcantara, the floor is yours.
Okay. I'm sorry for the technical glitch. As I said, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, my friends and colleagues from ABAC. Welcome to our ABAC PH Culmination Forum this year. My name is Tomas Alcantara, and me and my colleagues in this meeting represent the Philippines to the APEC Business Advisory Council, or ABAC, the private sector body in APEC. Together with our counterparts in the region, we meet 4 times a year to discuss our priorities, and from these we draw our recommendations, which we present to the leaders during the annual APEC summit at the end of the year. For this year, except for the first meeting last February in Sydney, our quarterly meetings have been set via virtual platform. ABAC Philippines was actually supposed to host the second meeting last April, but then COVID-19 happened. However, resilient as we are, the pandemic is not one that will keep us from moving forward. ABAC Philippines so far has organized 2 virtual events this year. First, we had ADB and APEC experts present economic outlook in the pandemic scenario. Then we had the president of the De La Salle College of St. Benilde and the executive director of RMIT University talk to us about how education sector is addressing this challenge. The webinars underscored the role of regional cooperation in responding to COVID-19, the value of sharing best practices and economies complementing each other to build capacities. We would like to build on this platform and draw more lessons from the region as we build a more inclusive and resilient economy. While the pandemic has put many industries to a halt and caused thousands to lose their jobs, it has also accelerated digital innovation among businesses and communities. The same digital technology will enable us to harness our human capital for the new future of work, and the same digital technology that will provide new products and services that supports financial inclusion and growth of key sectors, including the SMEs. Even prior to the pandemic, we were already talking about the 4th industrial revolution. COVID-19 only made us shift gears, perhaps so because of our acceleration in the environment. Still, the challenge is to ensure that economic growth and opportunities from a more liberalized trade and investment will benefit all, especially the developing economies. Let us leverage digital innovation to achieve this goal. Good morning, and I wish a productive forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Alcantara. And to give the keynote message, let's call on the President and CEO of the Aboitiz Group and ABAC Philippines member, Mr. Sabin M. Aboitiz.
Ambassador Luang Minon Thon, Embassy of Lao, Ambassador Shobini Bunasikera, Embassy of Sri Lanka, Mr. Eric Tamayo, Executive Director of the APEC Philippines National Secretariat in the DFA, colleagues in ABAC Philippines, headed by Chairman Tomas Alcantara, colleagues from APEC Economies joining us today as our esteemed resource panelists, friends and partners in government and the private sector, and to everyone watching online. Mayong buntag sa inyong tanan. I'm glad to join you in this forum of ABAC's digital innovation. We cannot re-emphasize the timeliness and urgency of our topic this morning. Let me express my deepest appreciation to our resource speakers and panelists who will be sharing their insights as we discuss digital tools and innovation being key to transformation, economic recovery, and resilience. We will have conversations about the importance to retool and repurpose for the new normal, enhance and scale up programs that boost financial inclusivity and innovate towards supporting MSMEs, pivot to digital platforms to help them not just survive, but to thrive. Last July, APEC reported that COVID-19 had already caused a 3.7% drop in the Asia-Pacific region's economic growth for the year 2020, and the total output loss at US dollars 2.9 trillion. We understand that the full measure of the impact of this pandemic has yet to be known. But given this challenge, APEC's main recommendations for member economies are to invest in digital technology, improve technological infrastructure, and equip people with digital skills. These investments are basic for economies to survive. Indeed, we can all attest to the fact that digitalization has shielded businesses, or some of them at least, from completely going under in this global pandemic. Some companies struggled to make the shift, while for others, it was simply like flipping a switch. Aboitiz was lucky that we belong to the latter, where thanks to the digital transformation efforts that we put in place several years back, but more importantly, and I stress more importantly, the team was mentally ready, which is the hardest part and takes the longest time. Our collective experience these past months also points to how vital it is to have a strong public-private collaboration. According to the Asian Development Bank, we particularly need close cooperation in order to protect consumers against cybercrime frauds, prevent illegal activities, enhance cybersecurity, and to prevent cyber attacks while protecting personal data and privacy. I cannot emphasize enough that neither the private sector nor the governments can do this on their own. As a matter of fact, no country can do this on their own. As I've said before, we know that no country in the world, regardless of socio-economic status, can claim that they were well prepared to handle the COVID-19. This further highlights the need to maximize the regional cooperation to share our resources. Countries need to come together to address the gaps in both resources and strategy on the road to building back better. With that, I would like to thank all of you for being part of this forum, and I look forward to a fruitful time learning from everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aboitiz. As the ABAC members have mentioned, and through this forum, we hope to provide a regional perspective to learn best practices and successful models in APEC economies on digital innovation, especially under this time. The Digital Innovation Forum is divided into 3 sessions: digital innovation for the future of work, for financial inclusion, and for MSME development. In each and every session, we will have 3 panel discussions, and we are honored to have distinguished experts coming from the Asia-Pacific region. For the first session, digital innovation for the future of work, harnessing human capital in the digital age, we are going to focus on how to leverage the capabilities or expertise of pivot projects and services with greater value, and to retool for enhanced employability and sustainable entrepreneurship in the digital age. Our first panelist is Vladimir Vlasinovic. He is the Executive Director of Talento Digital para Chile, a public-private partnership that seeks to humanize the digital transformation of Chile. He has more than 10 years of experience in the design, implementation, and the evaluation of public impact initiatives. He specializes in public affairs, digital transformation, government affairs, public policy, and open innovation. Vladimir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I'm Vladimir Vlasinovic from Talento Digital from Chile. Now it's 10 p.m. in Santiago time, so I'm speaking to you from the past, and I will share a little bit of our experience with Talento Digital. I hope the screen is sharing okay. Quentin, is it looking okay?
It should be, yes. Yeah, it's on.
Okay, so as I was mentioning, Talento Digital is a public-private initiative for transforming Chile, for providing digital skills that our country needs for the digital revolution. So the first thing is about sizing the digital talent gap we have in Chile. Different studies have identified that we have around 5,000 digital talent gap every year. Every year, 5,000 jobs are posted and are vacant, are not filled on the side of the demand. On the side of the supply, IT careers haven't seen growth in the last 7 years to attend this high demand from companies for digital talent. And something that is not something to be proud of, in the IT sector, we only have 6% female participation. So we knew we needed to change this in Santiago and in Chile. And we knew that this problem we were facing, it was not only in our country, but it was a problem all around the world. So we went looking around the world to see what other countries and other cities were doing to bridge this digital talent gap that was produced by the accelerated digital transformation that we're seeing across the globe. So we went to see different experiences. In New York, we look at the New York Tech Talent Pipeline. In Barcelona, we look at the Barcelona Digital Talent. In London, we see the major digital talent program. And in Paris, there were other programs, in Argentina as well. So we took the best practice from different cities and different countries. And something that all this positive experience we learned is the way they were using the bootcamp methodology, the coding bootcamp methodology. So what are coding bootcamps? This was the strategy, the best practice that we see that was being used all around the world. I don't know if you are familiar with what this, but coding bootcamps are intensive, rapid skills training programs in IT skills, usually between 3 and 6 months of duration. Imagine this, I'm an IT engineer. It took 6 years to train to get my degree in IT engineering. This idea of training somebody to code, to be a programmer, to be an IT specialist in 3 to 6 months might sound amazing, but it works. A second common characteristic of coding bootcamps, the teaching method follows a practical, project-based, experiential learning. This is something very similar for traditional education, where you have a teacher just giving a lecture. This is very practical, project-based, oriented, active learning experience. And third, the curricula reflects the current industry needs. What is being taught at coding bootcamps is the exact demand that it's being raised by the industry. So our challenge was quite clear. How could we train 5,000 digital talents per year in a very, very short time? How could we do this? We didn't find any other coding bootcamp around the world that could train 5,000 talents in a year. So we head on for a platform approach. We thought, if Uber was able to be the biggest taxi company without having any car, and if Airbnb was able to be the biggest hotel chain without owning any real estate, so why couldn't we build a coding bootcamp without having any teachers, using the ideas of a talent or a digital talent pipeline as a service? So how does Talento Digital actually work? Talento Digital is a platform that connects the demand for talent, for IT talent, the training offer, and employability. And we do this in 3 simple steps. The first, and one of the most important steps, is that we identify the needs of the company. We know exactly what kind of training programs, what kind of technology, and what are the quantity that companies are demanding. And then we connect the funding for the training process in bootcamp modality. This is a public-private alliance. So we funnel funding and we attract coding bootcamps from Chile and also from around the world, from different countries, from the US, from Spain, from the UK, from France and Argentina. We brought and invite coding bootcamps to come to Chile to offer their experience, the coding bootcamp experience. And when we have the coding bootcamps graduates, we do accompany the match between companies and the graduates so that employability is very fast and easy. What is our impact so far? Last year, 2019, we started with 1,500 scholarships for coding bootcamps. This year, we are conducting 3,500 scholarships, and we are hoping to stabilize 2021, 2022 in 5,500 scholarships for a total of 16,000 full scholarships for digital talents. What has happened in the industry here in Chile? The first coding bootcamp arrived to Chile in 2014, and since then, until before Talento Digital started, we only have 2 coding bootcamps, giving only service to a few hundred people per year. After Talento Digital started, we see an enormous growth from coding bootcamps. Last year, we have 10 coding bootcamps working here in Chile. This year, now we have 15 coding bootcamps working in Chile. And we are hoping and looking forward to still growing for next year. We discovered a surprising untapped demand for coding bootcamps. Last year, our first goal for 1,500 scholarships, we received 15,000 student applications. That's a 10 times surplus demand. And the calls we did after this year, their first and second call, has seen 22 times and 12 times more demand from student applications that are available scholarships. So as you can see, there's a lot of interest from students, and we're also seeing a lot of interest from companies to tap this talent pipeline. Over 170 companies have joined our network, demonstrating high interest to tap these digital talents that they're in need for their business. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. Now, our second panelist is Michael Fung. He is the Deputy Chief Executive of Skills Future Singapore, or SSG, a statutory agency under the Ministry of Education. He oversees the development of the continuing education and training system in Singapore through managing funding and contractual partnerships with private training providers, institutes of higher learning, and enterprises. He also oversees the human resource function and champions the data capabilities, governance, and reporting practices at SSG. Dr. Fung.
Thank you, Quentin. First of all, I want to thank ABAC for the invitation to be part of this conference to discuss this very timely and important topic. So a very good morning to your excellencies, to colleagues and friends in the Philippines government and industry, in the international organizations that are tuning in. My name is Michael, and I'm from Skills Future Singapore. We are a government agency reporting into the Ministry of Education, and our mission is to set the policies and provide funding and support to businesses and the workforce as they go through training and upskilling to meet the challenges of the industry. I don't have presentation slides today, so I'll spend the next 5 minutes or so sharing a few thoughts and the journey that we have taken in the Singapore context. So if you look at this topic about disruption, as some of the former speakers have spoken to this, we have been facing disruptions even before COVID. With the advent of digital technologies, with the rise in data, we had seen many industry sectors being impacted by technology. And what COVID has really done is to accelerate the pace of the transformation that's needed. Because businesses now have no choice but to transform in order to survive. And individuals who have lost their jobs have to pick up new skills to be able to be part of the transformation. So we think that COVID is a great opportunity for businesses, industry sectors, and our economies to transform into productive and more resilient structures that will see us through the current disruption and future disruptions. What we have been working on in Singapore has been to reimagine and to transform our education and training sector over the years. In 2015, we launched the Skills Future movement, and that built upon progress that we made for decades in the area of workforce training. We had to envision a new form of education and training, one that is a lot more flexible and agile, one that's much more adaptive to the current needs of industry and emerging skills needs of the workforce. So through Skills Future, we had envisioned an education and training system where there are multiple pathways, not just an traditional academic pathway, but one that also provides pathways for progression through skills mastery. We want to move from a system that is very much front-loaded, as in many education systems around the world, to one that is much more lifelong in nature. Because our belief is that with the rapid disruption of skills, there's no way that we can equip our students and graduates with all the skills that they need for a lifetime. So our system naturally would have to evolve to one that is much more just in time to the needs of the workforce as they go through the career cycle and the life cycle. We wanted a system that is much more integrated in terms of academic elements as well as work-related elements. So provision of work-study integration in our pre-employment programs, but also going through into the continuing education and training programs for the workforce. And finally, a strong emphasis on priority and emerging skills. Given the advent and the rise of digital skills, it is now increasingly important for our workforce and for individuals to have these skills to be able to be productive and to remain employable. So particular emphasis on some of these skills in pre-employment, but also post-employment training. So the Skills Future movement was really an attempt, a comprehensive national attempt to address the reformation of our education and training system and to provide near universal access to continuing education and training throughout life. As part of the work under Skills Future, we had developed 34 skills frameworks for industry sectors, jobs in the industry sectors, mapping out the technical skills that are needed and the horizontal cross-cutting skills that are needed. And this then becomes a language as we look at provision of training and upskilling opportunities, as we look at working with training industry, with employers, with individuals to develop the necessary skills for the current jobs and for future jobs in these industries. We had also developed a series of training programs in emerging and priority skills. We call it the Skills Future series. There are more than 1,000 courses at the basic, intermediate, and advanced level, covering emerging areas such as cybersecurity, data analytics, robotics automation, use of financial technologies, urban transportation, and so on. In the recent times, due to the COVID pandemic, we had also launched a range of support programs. We call them the SG United programs to create new jobs, to provide necessary training and the upskilling so that individuals are able to take on new jobs, those that have been displaced in some of the hardest hit sectors. So all these work that we've been doing in the past few decades, including the Skills Future movement in recent times, has helped us to be more prepared for the disruptions that we face, and in particular for the COVID pandemic, the disruptions coming from that. What we have found to be critically important in this whole move towards upskilling our workforce and our nation is mindsets. The mental readiness, as Mr. Aboitiz talked about earlier. How do we shift employers' mindsets to embrace transformation and change? Even as they face challenges in the current business, how do they see beyond and be able to take steps to transform the businesses, not so that they not only survive, but they put themselves on a good foundation for further growth? And similarly, for individuals who are in perhaps currently in good jobs or perhaps in distressed states, how do they embrace that mindset that they continue to upskill themselves, including in important areas like digital skills, so that they can continue to remain employable in the current jobs and also to take on new jobs as they emerge. So we have undertaken extensive engagement by working with multiple government agencies, with the unions, with trade bodies, with community organizations to address this mindset shift that's needed. And the COVID pandemic has just given us further push to advance that message. Looking around the region, we have been working with regional governments, including the government here in the Philippines, to extend our skilling efforts and journey with the regional countries. Yesterday, we were very pleased to launch the Global Technology Innovation Village together with the ADB to proliferate Industry 4.0 skills to member countries of ADB around the region. And that's part of an extension to the skills development work that we are pursuing under Skills Future. And we face many common challenges, our different countries around the region, with globalization, with technology, with COVID, and there are many sectors that require transformation and upskilling. And in Singapore, we have developed the skills frameworks to guide our journey, and we're happy to have our Singapore entities work with entities in other countries to customize these skills frameworks to their needs. And on those fronts, we are very pleased to have partnerships with the Department of Trade and Industry in the Philippines. We have also had conversations with various industry bodies, including IBPAP, with the Philippines Chamber of Commerce, and we hope to continue these discussions with the Philippines, but also in the broader ASEAN and Asian region. And our belief is that when we work together in these areas, we will learn from one another, and we'll be able to ride these disruptions and be able to grow our economies, ensure that our workforce remains employable. I'll stop there, and I'd be happy to take questions during the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Our third panelist is Lito Tayag. He's the chairman of the IT and Business Process Association of the Philippines, or IBPAP, the country's umbrella organization for the IT Business Process Management, or IT-BPM industry. He is also the country managing director or CMD of Accenture Incorporated Philippines, with a geographic responsibility for the growth and sustainability of Accenture's business in the Philippines for providing technology, operations, interactive and consulting services to Accenture's global and local clients. Lito is also Accenture's corporate citizenship lead in ASEAN. He counts several years of solid experience in outsourcing, technology, and consulting. Lito, good morning.
Good morning. I thank ABAC for inviting me to be part of this panel. Let me go straight to my key points on the future of workforce. Even prior to COVID-19, we have seen massive disruption brought about by the emerging technologies, which for the past few years forced every business to go digital. And the pandemic significantly accelerated the digital transformation across all industries. And so when we talk of human capital in the digital age, we are really talking of a resilient workforce under these two contexts. That means the workforce needs to adjust to the changing and accelerating new requirements framed by both digital transformation and the pandemic. Building the new required skills for the new requirements then is key to creating a resilient workforce of the future. Our role as leaders, including the chief HR officers, is to help individuals acquire the new skills and mindsets, as Dr. Fong said, needed for the future work. In order to navigate the human impact of the pandemic, let me share one point of view and which we largely are implementing in the industry. This is based on a study made by Accenture. There are 5 key areas we need to focus for a resilient workforce. These are predicting skills demand shifts, assessing skills profiles, connecting workers at scale, accelerating learning, and fostering shared resilience. Let me briefly go through each of them and cite specific examples based on my experience and exposure in the IT BPO industry. The first is focusing on predicting shifts in skills demand. The unprecedented disruption and pace of change can make traditional planning models obsolete. So we start with defining a workforce strategy. We identify the current needs and then look into the future and evolve a plan to include resilience in workforce sourcing and skilling. It is important that we focus on future skills and aptitudes required. And of course, we tap into technology like analytics to uncover labor market, supply and demand. In the Philippine IT BPO setting, we have seen this shift happening even before COVID. During the pandemic, again, based on the study of IBPAP, the shift accelerated in industries like healthcare and in technologies like cloud. The next is assessing skills profile. First, we need to create a baseline for the capabilities we have versus what we see as the new demand. Then we define profiles based on skills, aptitudes, and interests required. We have to share this information, of course, to our people as development opportunities. Let me cite an example, what we have developed in IBPAP called It Starts Here. It's a play on IT Starts Here portal. It Starts Here is an information gateway and career guide that will help fresh graduates, job seekers, and even career shifters explore opportunities in the IT BPM industry and assess which jobs suit them based on their educational background, their current skill sets and interests, and their desired professional trajectory. The next, very important, is connecting workforce at scale. This challenge is, of course, not limited to individual companies. So as an industry, or even as a workforce, we need to be able to bring people together at scale by being able to shift the impacted employees within and outside the organization and help people get access to employment opportunities. We need to create partnerships, unlikely as they may be. And this can include nonprofits, the public sector, training institutions, and other ecosystems of the industries. We need to reconsider the workforce model by looking at alternative employment options. Some examples could be part-time, the gig economy, even freelance options. We have 2 good examples of connecting workforces. The first is the Returning Overseas Filipino Job Opportunities in IT BPM. Launched in October 2020, this project is in collaboration with the Department of Labor and Employment, the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, and IBPAP, which aims to help returning overseas Filipinos find meaningful employment in the IT BPM sector by linking them with potential employers from the industry. Another example is SICAP.ph. The Office of Vice President Robredo created a job listing platform to provide new opportunities for Filipino workers who are displaced by COVID-19. The OVP has partnered with a tech company and built the website SICAP.ph, where job vacancies from participating employers will be posted and can be accessed by applicants for free. Then, of course, we need to accelerate training. Because of the changing skills requirements, we need to create the ability for people to rapidly learn in order to stay employed. This is quite straightforward, so I'll go straight to some examples and imperatives. Vladimir talked of Talento Digital. Locally, we have the project for IBPAP in collaboration with ICT to upskill our people in the IT BPO industry at scale across different skills, which we have identified are at risk of getting automated or disrupted. The second is the National Upskilling Program, which the IT BPM industry continues to advocate for the development for the upskilling and reskilling program for the country. This is similar to other talent development investments from other countries, including what Dr. Fong has shared for Singapore. The aim is to upskill our people through various channels such as instructor-led training, massive open online courses, certification courses, boot camps for new technologies, and even advanced degrees. And lastly, we need to foster shared resilience. Workforce resilience should be shared at least at the industry level, supported by industry partners that fosters a more collaborative talent ecosystem. We need to keep investing on talent, just as we should put more time and money on alliances and learning and upskilling. For the IT BPO industry, where we have majority of our people still working from home, we need to create a conducive workplace that is the home. And because the home has become the new workplace for many, we need to stay connected with our people. We can do this by collaborating with our partner industries like the telcos and the technology suppliers and the training institutions. In the end, we need to make all these adjustments for resilience, to grow our industries, create more employment, and to make the Philippines continue to be a top destination of high-value services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lito. Now, let me now call on our panelists for the first session. We've got around 20 minutes for discourse on this, and I'll wait for everyone to come on, for your screens to come on, and then we'll begin. All right, we just need to get Vladimir and Michael on the platform. Okay, welcome back, Vladimir and Michael. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your presentations. You've been attacking the issues of disruption and innovation from different angles, but let me just divide this into the questions into two. The first one is about preparing the workforce, preparing the academe, and students to get into the workforce and having these skills. And the second one is to talk about the existing workforce and how to upskill them to make sure that they survive this disruption and they also thrive in terms of the demands of this new imperative of the global digital economy. So let's start on the education side. Vladimir, building on your presentation, I mean, you have coding camps. You're certainly looking at IT skills and critical thinking skills there. But for the gentlemen as well who are joining us, Michael and Lito, if you were to identify the top 3 skills that are needed in this post-pandemic environment where somebody can transcend this disruption, what would they be? Especially for those who are getting into the world of work. Those are the class of 2020 and 21. Let's start with Lito. I guess you're the last one. You can start with Lito first.
Sure. Some of the important aptitudes and skills that are needed in this industry are really more on the soft skills. The technology you can always learn. As Vladimir has mentioned, we have some technology skills that we have. But I think it is important to make sure that the people will have also the right attitudes, the mindsets in order to, so learning, for example, the attitude of learning and wanting to be able to do beyond the comfort zones that you have today, I think it's very important. And that will have to be supported, of course, by the availability of trainings that will be provided by the academe as well. In this day and age, it is important that we have the ability to learn and to absorb new technologies because they keep on changing. The technology itself is going to stay, but the changes itself are going to be more important, as we go down the line. And so that ability to learn new things becomes very important as well, and the openness that goes with it.
Good, thanks. You can't stress that enough. A critical mindset and a progressive mindset for learning is going to be important, especially since disruption happens on a daily basis now. Michael, let's take your thing. You have their own over 30 skill clusters, but it's hard to really compress them into and crystallize them into a few. But if you were to talk to a policymaker here, especially in charge of developing the curricula for either TechVoc or standard school systems, what would you advise?
Yeah, so I share a common view with what Lito had just shared. So our philosophy is that we want to embed technical skills together with what we call critical core skills. So for an individual to be able to stay employable, not only they need the technical skills, they must have the right soft skills. And we've defined 16 critical core skills, bucketed them into three areas. One is about being able to think critically, being able to identify problems, think about how to solve it, find solutions. Another one is around interacting with other people, teamwork, collaboration, communication, influencing, and so on. And the third one, which is quite very important, is self-management. How do you embrace change? How do you have that mindset that will allow you to take positive steps when you're facing problems? So those critical core skills are important across the entire workforce. So we look at embedding our students with those skills, but also nurturing that in the workforce. Now, on the technical skills that's needed, some of the top skills we have seen, and I'm going to respond to three, Quentin, since you asked for the magic number. Some of the top roles that are being demanded by businesses that we see today is in the area of digital marketing, in the area of cybersecurity skills, in the area of data analytics. So for those who are looking for job opportunities in the Singapore context, and I suspect in many other countries as well, having these skills or picking up skills in these areas would help to increase the chance of employability.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Certainly, a critical mindset is very important, the self-management part. I mean, as an employer, we also look for that in our new hire. So it's good to get some affirmation from SSG. Now, Vladimir, I mean, you began this presentation talking about the core skills and how your boot camps have actually gone and helped transform, disadvantaged youth. Tell us a bit from a Chilean example. What can you share with another developing country like the Philippines, which is basically 5 times the population, in terms of what skills would be necessary as we ourselves grew up with the pandemic?
Sure. Well, first of all, we need to kind of separate between what are the main technologies that industry are demanding and what are the skills. As Licho mentioned, technology changes all the time and the demand for them is constantly changing. For example, we recently conducted a research here in Chile, and the most demanded profile in IT skills is the full stack developer, then the front-end developer, and then the back-end developer. And way ahead are data scientists, data analysts, and cyber ethical hackers. The demand we're seeing right now is for front-end, full stack, and back-end developers. But as Licho and Michael mentioned, and I couldn't stress more, this is all about what skills will be needed in the long term. And the most important thing is the mindset. And we try to embed 4 critical skills in all our programs, independent of what is the specific technology we're training. First is communication. This is very different from when I was studying information technology engineering. Nobody stressed the idea of a programmer to be good at communication. Now it's critical. Second, collaboration. The idea of a star programmer that you go alone and you do your programming and your code all by yourself, those days are off. Nowadays, a good programming team is a team that has very different talents. So somebody in the team that doesn't know how to collaborate is not going to be very successful in the industry. Third is creativity. You need to have teams that are able to think out of the box, to think disruptive technologies and not just more of the same. And finally, it's critical thinking. So these 4 C's, communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking, is what we call that are the 21st century skills that we try to embed in all our programs.
Right. Thank you, Vladimir. It seems, there's variations of the theme with the 3 that you mentioned, but certainly all these core things from thinking, the teamwork, the communication have been quite critical for us as employers, but as across APEC, you're going to see a lot of nodding heads there in terms of employers and also academics. Now, let's move on to, the skills within the workforce itself. I mean, you look at the country like the Philippines, and I think that statistic measures a lot of APEC economies where majority, in fact, the Philippines is 99.6% at least of registered enterprises are MSMEs. And, they're pivoting daily. They're suffering from dwindling cash flow, overhead constraints and all that. How would you prod both policymakers and the entrepreneurs themselves to be able to invest in these skills for the long run, even if it means an additional investment beyond what's critically necessary for survival? Let's start with you again, Lito.
Sure. Let me put this in the context of the IT BPM industry, because that's the industry that I'm most familiar with. But if we have right now about 1.3 million people in this industry. And a good number of them, there are still parts of this industry that are in the what we call the low-level skills, the low value skills that you have that are at risk of getting automated and becoming obsolete. So it is imperative that we scale up, that we upskill our people at scale. And to a large extent, there is going to be a lot of investment by individual companies. But I think that is not enough. We should be able to have upskilling at scale in collaboration with the government as well as the academy. And this is a very important approach, because individual companies are busy, addressing, doing their current, keeping the lights on their current businesses that we have. And so the upskilling will have to be a collective responsibility and with collaboration with the government as well as the academy. Let me cite a particular example where this can be done collaboratively with a lot of success. In one of the courses that we have that is a hot skill, for example, we take the industry. In fact, one of the companies creates the curriculum and then provides the teachers to be run under one of the universities as one of their courses that we have. What that does is that the requirements are in step, are within the requirements of the industry themselves. They have the subject matter experts as the teachers, and then you have the university as the platform for the learning. And the result is that traditionally, our recruitment, what we call yield rate, are about 10 to 12%. And that means we only hire 10 to 12% of those that we test. In this particular case, where we actually ran this program, we had a yield rate of as high as 70%. But these are the kinds of examples that we should scale up in order to upskill the rest of the workforce.
Okay, thank you very much, Lito. I mean, much appreciated, especially that as they transition in not only to the world of work, but also upskilling themselves as the world of work changes. Likewise, Michael?
Yeah, so this problem with MSMEs that you mentioned is common, right? And so we have similar challenges with the small, medium enterprises in Singapore. How do you get them to embrace upskilling and upscaling of their businesses and workforce as they are looking at month-on-month revenue pressures and survival and so on? So in the Singapore context, right, we address it through a few ways. One is to come up with simple solutions that SMEs can adopt readily. So there are a number of pre-approved technology solutions that are targeted for SMEs in different sectors. And so SMEs do not have to go through a lengthy process of technology evaluation and negotiation of pricing. So the government does that on behalf of the SMEs by pre-approving a number of solutions from private providers. In addition to that, the government provides some degree of subsidy to reduce the cost of adoption for SMEs. Now, even with that, it is still difficult because it's not just a cost issue. It's not just identifying solutions. It's adopting the mindset that I need to do something about my business and be able to transform. So here we work with larger companies. We call them queen bees. Essentially, they have a value chain of smaller enterprises that serve them. And with these enlightened queen bee companies, leading enterprises, they would then work with their value chain, SMEs, and work with them on transforming different parts of businesses. And so we are attempting such an approach, and we've seen some initial encouraging success, but really this is the other way that we are approaching the SME segment. Still a very difficult problem with some initial traction.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. And certainly the room for transmission and technology transfer with the queen bees, as you speak, are subject matter experts to smaller units like SMEs is going to be very critical to the country like the Philippines. Now, Vladimir, want to get your take as well in terms of how you've advised other entrepreneurs in terms of making that investment now.
Sure. So let me share you something that we've learned here in our experience in Chile is that maybe the way we segment companies doesn't reflect the traditional way of segmenting companies. So at least the way we are segmenting the companies we are trying to serve with the digital talents we're having. It's like making a division between those ones that have a core IT that are very dedicated to technology and information technology. Think about Accenture, EY, Everest, Tata, all those companies, together with what we call here the caseras, that are small digital startups, their requirements is they're just needing a lot of talent. They need to grow fast, and grow with good talent. And what they're asking to us is, we need good, fast talent. And on the other hand, we see another kind of companies that doesn't have a core IT, that are very experiencing a very challenging digital transformation. Think about the banks, think about retail, think about service companies. All those companies are looking kind of a downsizing perspective. Banks, with digital banks, they will have to lay off several cashiers, bank executives. All those jobs are going downward. So what they're needing, same with the retail, the traditional salesman or the traditional cashier from a supermarket, it's disappearing. So what they're asking to us is that they need to retrain their workforce. They're not telling us, hey, give me more IT talent. They are telling me, hey, I have a lot of talent here. They just don't know how to code. Could you train them to be coders? So from a cashier to a coder. Those are the kind of challenges they're asking to us, because most companies have had a lot of preoccupation for their workforce. They just don't want to start into a massive layoffs dynamic. They want to keep their workforce that have been loyal through many years and retrain them with better opportunities, so that digital transformation, it's got good news for the company or for the workers, as it's not a bad word, a synonym of massive layoffs.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, you look at this crisis as an opportunity in terms of retooling and reskilling, so they don't have to just survive, but thrive in terms of their employment nature and contribute to the company as a whole. Gentlemen, one last question, and this is a consolidation of the number of questions I've seen relevant to this panel, which is about how early and how can you intervene to make sure that STEM education can really come into the student body as early as as early as elementary school. So the question here that I've seen from a number of them is how do you work with governments to make sure that early on a child or a tweener is able to incorporate STEM education into their learning process, both from the curriculum and outside the curriculum? Lito, let's start again with you.
Sure. Well, as you have mentioned, STEM is a fundamental skill. It's a fundamental requirement for technology down the line. And unfortunately, you cannot teach STEM at the latter part, not in the universities. It has to start on the basic education. And that is something that we all need to accept, because that foundation is carried all the way to the university degrees that we have. And so I think it is important for us, even at different industries, particularly for us in IT industry, to work with the government and to support the development of STEM early on from the basic education. And we actually have started this as part of our collaboration with the government. I want to cite our particular example in Accenture, for example. We have taken as part of our corporate citizenship a program called the Digital Upskilling of the Filipino, where we actually bring the literacy and the at least exposure all the way to the basic education level, with the hope of influencing the full education, including and maybe primarily STEM.
Great, Lito, thank you very much. And it's great to see that public-private partnership happening, especially as the government itself pivots towards module-based learning and remote hybrid systems. Michael?
Yes, so this question is a critically important one. And if you think about why we're having some of these conversations, it points to the fact that our formal education system and whatever training that comes after that needs to be increasingly integrated. Because when we talk about IT skills being very important, then the STEM basis, as the students are growing up in basic education, is important. Similarly, when we think about the critical core skills that I talked about, 21st century skills for the workforce, we need to start working those in to basic education as well. Because if an individual is prepared from young age to think critically, to self-manage and be able to embrace change, to be able to work in teams, then they bring those skills as they enter the workforce. And so when we start thinking about some of these skills, whether it's a STEM, whether it's a critical core skills, 21st century skills, we see it as a continuum. And so as part of the Ministry of Education, we are infusing some of these skills that are required by employers back into the education system, starting in the early years, not just STEM, but also 21st century skills, and also infusing work-related perspectives as students go through the formal education years to be prepared for the workforce.
Thank you, Michael. And Vladimir?
Sure. So very coincident with what Lito and Michael said, just to add something. So how do you teach STEM? How do you teach communication? How do you teach collaboration? It's not only about the content. So it's a lot about the methodology. We need to make a very hard shift from traditional learning methodologies, passive learning methodologies, where you have a professor giving a lecture, to active learning methodologies, project-based learning. There are many innovative methodologies that are the adequate methodologies to give this new kind of knowledge. And a lot of very important thing is to inspire curiosity. I'm not sure if I'm saying it well, curiosity. To learn science, to learn technology, there's nothing more powerful to have a curious mind, because that will give you the driver to learn by yourself. It's not nowadays a professor pushing you knowledge inside your head. It's your inner self looking for more knowledge, and curiosity, it's a powerful driver.
Thank you very much. Now, and just to take away from that, I mean, inquisitive participative learning, public-private partnerships, especially as the government itself makes a transition, especially with a larger workforce coming in. And thirdly, you can't begin early enough, especially for stem cell education, especially building in that curiosity and that inquisitive mindset that will allow you to get to grasp STEM as not only a school skill, but a lifelong skill. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure, robust discussion. Vladimir Glisinovic, Lito Dayag, Michael Fong, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all our panelists. Now moving on to our second session, digital innovation for financial inclusion, leveraging technology to reach the underserved and the unbanked. This session will look at successful business models of digital innovation for greater financial inclusivity. Our first panelist for this session is Peter Franken. Peter's career spans over 25 years in financial services, specializing in O&D fintech, innovation, and large-scale transformations. He's held C-level and executive positions with industry leaders such as Citigroup, Shinsei Bank, A+, Monex Securities, and the Monex Group. His hallmark is pioneering innovative services by embracing bleeding-edge technologies while minimizing time to market and dramatically reducing costs. He is well-versed in large-scale IT transformation, bimodal management, innovation, software development, data center operations, financial operations, and fintech. Peter, the stage is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Just allow me to share my screen, and thank you for the introduction. I'm humbled by what you said. Today, I'm representing the ABAC initiative, and I'm going to talk about and quickly introduce that and how that is relevant to you. So here we are, and this is New York, but we can very quickly switch between locations these days. So here we go. Before talking about ABACs, the previous session really highlighted the challenges that we're seeing in digitization of our industries, and I want to talk about the financial industry, and specifically how that plays into financial inclusion. And when we started our journey, we interviewed many banks and fintechs across Asia to find out how are things going. And of course, everybody hears about fintech or whatever, but the untold story is that when a fintech tries to sell new technologies to a bank, the process to actually do the sales is extremely slow. It is very common to spend 1 year to 2 years on actually doing a POC followed by implementation and then finally going production. And there's all kind of reasons for why this is so slow. And I don't want to go into much details, but there's a lot of confusion about what the regulators are saying and what people are hearing from the regulators about innovation these days. And people tend to actually take kind of a too conservative view of things in my mind. The other thing that is happening is that the processes and thinking, and we talked about it in the previous session, are way outdated in the banking industry. You know, mainframes were with us 30 years ago. They're still with us, but it comes with a lot of luggage and overhead that really is not needed with the current technologies. So we really have a huge skill gap. We also have a mindset gap, and we have a problem around how we perceive the regulations and what we actually can do. And of course, this plays very much into the problem when banks are trying to use new technology. And when we talk about banks, we're not talking about the big banks, we're also talking about rural banks or credit associations, all kind of financial institutions. So if you look at this pipeline, you know, though sometimes it takes literally weeks to build something, we easily will spend 1 year talking about it. So how do we break out of that cycle was really the initiative or the thinking behind APIX, and how do we do this? Because, you know, if we look at what is, you know, what is kind of the problem if you look this from a distance, right? If we talk about financial inclusion, you know, really what it is about is that a financial institution must lower the cost of manufacturing their products, because financial inclusion means smaller accounts, smaller margins. So your production cost has to come down dramatically in order to be sustainable, right? And that is needed to reach underserved and emerging customer segments, right? Customers have already gone digital, right? Most developing markets in Asia, the penetration of mobile technology is 100%. Not everything is smartphone, okay, but the penetration is very, very high. While access to financial services is less than 30%, there's a huge gap. Non-financial institutions are disrupting finance for the micro SME market with digital-only low-cost offerings, right? So we have fintechs that help financial institutions. There's also fintechs that are the disruptors. They're using the new technology to move really fast. Most incumbents and rural banks and financial institutions are not digital. They may have nothing, or they may have very outdated equipment. If they don't go digital, they will become irrelevant. This is very important to understand. Though fintechs can play a critical role, it's proven, you know, we have to break through the speed barrier of working together. So if we think about the incumbents as driving a Trabant, and if you don't know what a Trabant is, it's like kind of a tuk-tuk or something of the East Germany, and they're basically trying to get their mainframes to go faster. Now that's okay, as everybody drives a Trabant, there is no problem. But what happens if Ant Financial or Facebook or whatever starts to do financial services? They're driving Teslas, and they're really fast and nifty cars, very, very, very advanced. So this is what the disruptors are looking like. And then when we think about fintechs trying to help the incumbents, this is what happens. They basically run into a wall of time and slowness. So the innovation is really not going to happen very quickly. And that is very sad, because the technology today, I've spent near 30 years in this industry, is really very different from what it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We can go very fast. The Tesla has reached our era. The era of the old combustion engine is really behind us, but not in the streets, not in the banks that we see today. So what happened is that this phenomena became apparent to the regulators in Singapore, who, as you may know, have been trying to kind of break out of this logjam by trying to be as innovative as possible. So the MIS in Singapore and the IFC, part of the World Bank, got together, and they got together with the ASEAN Banker Association and said, we must do something to help our banks to go faster. How can we create something that will help them to go over through this speed barrier? So, and that created the ASEAN Financial Innovation Network. And that network basically built what is now known as the APIX platform. And what is the APIX platform? It's basically, I'm going to keep it really simple because in the interest of time, but basically think it as of a magic where we take the Trabant and we turn it into Teslas by using fintech's technology. And so, as I said, I keep it really simple here, but the whole idea here is to basically help the banks to move fast. So I'm going to talk for 2 seconds a little bit more technically what it actually is. And you're more than welcome to visit the platform. You can learn more about it. But basically, it is a marketplace, first of all, for banks to find fintechs. But that's not the only thing, because finding is, for many banks, is a problem and a challenge, because banks don't know what to trust. Is this okay or not? How do I communicate? So finding is one problem. But the other thing is how do you quickly use the technology? So on the platform, all these fintechs publish so-called APIs. APIs are kind of a special language that allows you to connect things together. So, and with that, you can kind of very quickly build up complex systems. So instead of writing code, you write connectors between big things of code. So these APIs are on the platform, and people can come there and actually use them on the platform in the cloud right there. So you can actually build your prototypes or your ideas in Apex with your programmers very quickly. And we talked about the skill gap. We have done workshops, etc., with programmers that have never done this. It takes about a day or 2 days to get a programmer that has done some work before to be proficient on here. So it really is exciting for programmers, because suddenly they can use all these APIs that they were dreaming of, and they can start stitching things together. It also has a way for banks to post problem statements. People can respond to it. We also built a whole kind of hackathon site module on it, so that you can host a hackathon and kind of invite people to come and help you fix your problems and come up with ideas. So what are these APIs? Now, so these APIs are covering many different types of capabilities, like know your customer, AML, lending options, point-to-point lending, analytics, blockchain, cybersecurity, RegTech, SupTech, whatever. So there's a wide variety. On the platform, we have I think over 300 fintechs that are currently fully registered, and we have about a library of 1,000 fintechs to choose from. So this gives you kind of a huge Lego, box with Lego blocks to start assembling things. So as as we were talking about the skill gap, right? Instead of writing COBOL, you basically are using APIs instead, and APIs are basically like big functionalities that you put together. So there's a massive speed up in that. So one line of code suddenly is a whole application. And sometimes we talk about know your customer, KYC, but with blockchain technology, you can find fintechs that have come up with know your cow. And this is being done in areas in Africa where small farmers can use blockchain to uniquely identify their cattle and use that to use it as collateral in lending. So there's a tremendous amount of innovation happening out there that is mind-blowing, and through Apex, you can get access to that. Before I close, very quickly, specifically for the Philippines, there's a lot of financial institutions that are looking to go digital, and we're having active discussions with various parties to see how we can help in that. And one of the things that we are actively working on is to say, can we come up with a pre-assembled mini financial platform or core platform that's kind of already pre-assembled. So instead of you assembling it, it's kind of a pre-assembled, and it's called Go Apex. You can visit that to see kind of what it looks like conceptually. But this is basically the idea to say, okay, you want to go digital, instead of you making the choices, we have already come up with a set of choices. You need to kind of customize it for your needs, but you can start from a very good starting position. So it's kind of basically, getting the Tesla, and you need to just decide the color and how many seats and stuff like that. And this is what technology can do today. We're really reaching a state, and that's made possible by cloud computing. It's made possible by the internet. It's made possible by customers already having access to the internet through their mobile phones. So here I would like to stop, and I would urge you to come and visit us or contact me or any of my colleagues if you want to learn more. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Interesting analogies, and we'll take them back later in terms of how that transformation can actually happen in terms of a last mile delivery solution, especially here in the Philippines and other developing economies. Our next panelist is Ellen Joyce Sufiencia. She is the director of the Financial Inclusion Group, Center for Learning and Inclusion Advocacy, or CLIA, of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Joyce is deeply involved in various initiatives to drive the BSP's financial inclusion agenda forward. She handles policy development and advocacy work, with particular focus on inclusive digital finance, MSMEs, and agriculture financing. Joyce, good morning.
Hello, good morning, Quintin, and to the rest of the audience. First of all, allow me to thank the ABAC for giving BSP this opportunity to discuss our financial inclusion initiatives to your network. Forums like this is very important for our work as we secure broad-based support for financial inclusion in the country. And it's also an opportunity for me personally to learn from the previous speakers before me. Very interesting. So let me start by giving you a snapshot of the state of financial inclusion in the country. So just briefly, allow me to define financial inclusion. We define it in the BSP as a state where every Filipino has access to welfare-enhancing financial services. The BSP actually conducts a biennial financial inclusion survey, which measures financial inclusion from an individual's perspective. And just in July this year, we released the results of the 2019 Financial Inclusion Survey. And we found the results very encouraging. Our headline indicator for financial inclusion is, of course, ownership of a financial account. That's a basic tool for being considered financially included. And we're happy to report that from just 23% in 2017, account ownership grew to 29% in 2 years. That's equivalent to an additional 5 million Filipinos onboarded in that 2-year period. We also want to highlight the phenomenal growth of account ownership among the poorest, which doubled from just 14% in 2017, well below the national average in that year, to 27% in 2019. That significantly outpaced the growth of the national average and other income groups. This has dramatically narrowed the account ownership gap among the richest and the poorest. Among account types, the biggest gainer we see is the e-money accounts, which grew by 7 percentage points from just 1% in 2017 to 8% in 2019. And consistent with the rise of e-money is the increase in account holders who use digital payments, which more than doubled to 39% in 2019. We also see growth in the uptake of other financial services, such as formal credit, insurance, and investments. Despite this commendable growth, we of course recognize that much remains to be done, as 70% of our adult Filipinos still don't have an account. The top cited reasons for not owning an account are not really a surprise. It's lack of enough money, lack of need for an account, and lack of documentary requirements. And that is why in promoting account ownership, we realize it's not enough that we make opening an account easy and affordable. We also need to make sure that an account is actually perceived as valuable, that it can be used not only for saving extra money, which most people say they don't have, but that they can use it for basic transactions, including payments. And that is why digital payment and financial inclusion really go hand in hand. And the potential of digital technology as drivers of financial inclusion has long been widely recognized. And if you look at the next slide, we find from our survey that while we have a relatively high mobile phone and internet access penetration, these digital assets are underutilized for financial transactions. In fact, 7 in 10 unbanked adults have a mobile phone, which we see as an untapped opportunity for digital finance. To us, this highlights 2 main challenges in advancing digital finance. The first is financial and digital literacy. The main reasons that were cited in the survey for the low usage of online and mobile financial transactions are lack of awareness and trust. Another challenge is the digital divide in terms of gaps in smartphone ownership and internet access. Our survey showed rural areas, regions outside Metro Manila, and those who belong to lower socioeconomic groups are disproportionately disadvantaged. As we can see, internet penetration in Mindanao is not even half of that in Metro Manila. So BSP's financial inclusion efforts are also not only confined to the access needs of individual Filipinos, which we which we monitor through our financial inclusion survey, as I previously reported. BSP recognizes that for financial inclusion to really drive inclusive growth, we also need to focus on the financing needs of the MSME sector, given their outsized role in providing employment and sources of income to a significant number of Filipinos. However, even prior to the pandemic, MSMEs have consistently cited access to finance as one of the top barriers to their development and competitiveness. Banking sector statistics also show a declining trend in MSME lending as a percentage of the bank's total loan portfolio. We have actually anticipated that this challenge will further exacerbate as a result of the pandemic. The MSME sector has been among the hardest hit. Based on a survey conducted a few weeks into the ECQ, more than 60% reported, MSME respondents reported to have stopped operations and to have incurred zero sales. Lack of working capital figured prominently as an immediate concern. But there could be a silver lining, especially for MSMEs with online presence, as a significant share of consumers started making more online purchases, and with the forecasted e-commerce revenue growth hitting 42% this year. The estimated number of e-commerce users is also at 39 million in 2020, which is quite a sizable market. As the pandemic kicked in, BSP was quick to issue a series of time-bound regulatory reliefs and incentives to ensure banks do not completely turn their backs away from MSMEs, and to further stimulate financing for MSMEs, especially at a time when it was most needed. New MSME loans were considered as part of banks' reserve requirement compliance. We also reduced risk weight for MSME loans to as low as 50% and assigned zero risk weights to MSME and agri loans covered by the government's guarantee programs, including by the Agriculture Credit Policy Council. These COVID-related policy measures have freed up additional bank liquidity that were channeled to MSME financing, and we saw positive results and response from the banking sector. New MSME loans amounting to 40 billion have been generated during the ECQ based on survey of the top 30 banks. Existing MSME loans amounting to 25 billion were also renewed, while 1.8 billion were restructured. MSME loans used for compliance with reserve requirements has climbed to 120 billion from just 1.7 billion in 120 billion in October, from just 1.7 billion in April when this compliance mechanism was first introduced. But BSP's efforts to support MSME financing go beyond the regulatory relief measures. BSP aims to shape a sustainable ecosystem that facilitates meaningful participation from the banking sector. By meaningful participation, we mean that banks go into MSME financing not because of mandatory credit requirement, but because they really see the MSME sector as a strategic and viable market segment. And BSP has therefore undertaken a series of initiatives that aim to develop the necessary market infrastructure to improve banks' credit risk assessment and management tools, as well as bridge information asymmetries that prevent banks from lending to smaller firms or make banks heavily reliant on the use of collateral. And this is the rationale behind the key initiatives of the BSP for MSME financing. These initiatives include the credit risk database project that we are undertaking with JICA's assistance. And CRD aims to build a statistical scoring model to support banks' assessment of the probability of default of an SME borrower. BSP also continues to support the development of credit surety fund cooperatives, or the CSF. CSF program is actually a credit enhancement scheme which provides maximum 80% surety coverage for loans granted by banks to contributing MSMEs and their cooperatives. BSP is also working on the design and conduct of a national MSME demand side survey, which aims to generate better and more granular data on the profile and needs of MSMEs to inform targeted interventions, as well as to support the financial service providers' market research. Another initiative in the pipeline is the conduct of a study in partnership with a global expert for the development of the supply chain financing market in the country. We in the BSP recognize the potential of supply chain finance as an innovative approach to support access to bank financing of smaller firms who may lack credit history or are deemed high risk. These are just some of the initiatives that are specifically being pursued by BSP to support MSME financing. But we recognize that an underlying enabler for innovative MSME financing is the digital infrastructure. So allow me now to share BSP's broad strategy for digitalization in support of digital payments and financial inclusion. The governor has made public pronouncements of the BSP's bold targets by 2023 to onboard at least 70% of adult Filipinos to an account and to bring the share of digital payments in terms of transaction volume to 50%. These are the measurable outcomes envisioned in our 3-year digital payments transformation roadmap. The roadmap also acknowledges the strategic importance of consumer data, not only as something that needs to be protected, but also that can be harnessed in a way that maximizes the benefits for the financial consumers. To achieve these outcomes, the roadmap identifies 3 pillars that serve as the backbone of an inclusive digital payments ecosystem. The first is the digital payment stream, which aims to promote payment use cases of accounts and shift cash-based payment transactions to digital payments, particularly for paying bills and merchants, as well as government fees and taxes. The next pillar is a digital finance infrastructure, which is essentially the regulatory framework and platforms that facilitate scale and reach of digital financial services. One of the key pieces of this infrastructure is the Philippine ID system, which is our national digital ID system. The third pillar is data governance and standards, which aim to promote responsible and strategic use of digital assets by BSP supervised entities for the optimal benefit of financial system and the transacting public, of course. So this transformation roadmap actually builds on the foundations of inclusive digital finance that BSP has started to put in place in the last 4 years. And that includes the introduction of the low-cost transaction accounts through the basic deposit account guidelines, as well as the expansion of the cash-in and cash-out points through our agent banking regulation. And lastly, the interoperable digital payment trails via InstaPay and PesoNet, which were created under the National Retail Payment System framework. And we can no longer talk about the new economy and the new normal without talking about the digital imperatives. The pandemic has thrusted upon us the opportunity to shape a new economy powered by digital. But if we're not careful and deliberate, the benefits of this transition to digital could be uneven. Certain segments of the population may be further excluded. So we think that financial inclusion in the new economy really demands adequate digital infrastructure, especially to make internet connectivity widely available and affordable. BSP is actually advocating for policy reform to fast-track the expansion of internet infrastructure in areas unserved or poorly served by incumbent internet providers. Another is the PhilSys, which we hope to be implemented soon. This will provide every Filipino a digital ID and enable financial institutions to perform seamless, cost-efficient eKYC. Consumers need digital skills as well as a prerequisite for them to effectively and safely use digital financial services. And lastly, we need to continuously promote an enabling regulatory environment for innovative digital solution. BSP's proposed digital banking licensing framework and open banking are two regulatory initiatives worth highlighting. The creation of digital banking license is envisioned to attract innovative market players who have a strong digital play and can inject dynamism into the digital finance space that will ultimately benefit the consumers and MSMEs. These digital imperatives are embedded in the digital payments transformation roadmap of the BSP. I will end my presentation with this slide, which attempts to convey an envisioned future for financial inclusion, built on a consented data sharing regime facilitated by regulations for open banking, or open data as some would call it. Our goal is to shape an ecosystem that facilitates responsible sharing of customer transaction data to unlock access to a suite of well-designed financial services. We envision financial institutions able and compelled to deliver data-informed products that are hyper-tailored to the needs and context of the consumers, with the end goal, of course, of delivering optimum consumer value. In this future, for instance, a small business owner with no credit history and no collateral can access a tailored loan product from a bank based on his cash flow, payment transactions, and activities in e-commerce and other digital platforms. This future will not happen overnight, but we in the BSP are committed to take the necessary steps toward achieving this envisioned state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director Joyce. Really appreciate the BSP's role as well. I mean, as someone who moderated the panel at the BSP FinTech Summit, I take note really that your sandbox approach has really helped innovation in the sector with the public and private sector. And on that note, I'd like to call Peter in so we can have his discourse in terms of where to take this innovation to make those ambitious targets happen and to meet and fulfill inclusivity in the financial sector, especially for the poorest of the poor. Peter, you please join us. And now that you're on board, let's begin. I think one thing to notice since that landmark forum that the BSP governor had keynoted when he first came on board was really more how the convergence of the fintech sector is moving, the dynamics of it. And what we're seeing from an industry perspective is you're seeing banks turning into fintech companies to really scale up and also manage this disruption, but also even telco companies acting like banks. There's a lot of convergence coming in. The BSPs in the middle helping that innovation, and obviously developers and experts like yourself, Peter, are there to see that process happen with the kind of content and products that are going to be relevant for the players for exclusivity. So with that, the question I have is, how do you really move the needle in terms of getting that, the last mile delivery, the most marginalized into a developing country set of targets? Like, for example, to getting up to 70% in terms of banked people who have bank accounts or banked, and at the same time 50% in terms of transaction. What will move the needle from a developer's perspective and a private sector best practice perspective? Peter, can you share with us?
Yes, so it's a very good question, and I have to apologize. I don't think I'll have the perfect answer for the 70%. It's a huge challenge. I think that Joyce spoke about all the challenges that the Philippines has, and the goal is very aggressive, but is right. You have to, a lot of things have to happen. I think you can't do it top down. You have to go bottoms up, because a lot of infrastructure is needed to reach out to these customers. And we're talking about the Philippines, the numbers are, 30, 40 million people need to be reached, et cetera, et cetera. So you can't do that by top down. You have to look at what the infrastructure is on the ground, and everybody will have to play their bit to do the lending, to open up the accounts, et cetera. So this is where we're trying to help by providing kind of a shortcut. kind of cheating, so to speak, to say how can you get your, how can you digitize faster, and in that space there is a lot of challenges for financial institutions, et cetera, to do so. But there is a lot of empirical experience that has been built up over the last years that can be shared, and there is a lot of fintechs that are ready to help. And sometimes that may be hard to find, but I think we can make that much easier. We're not the only ones doing that, but across Asia, et cetera, we're rather unique in trying to pull that together and bring that to every Asian nation. So this is one area. I think the other area is when you go a little bit more into the kitchen, so to speak, of the bank. I think there is a lot of need to go digital. When I talk to various people in the Philippines over the last 10 days or so, everybody knows we must do something. But now the question is, how do we do it? Who's going to provide capacity building? Who's going to provide the technology and the ideas? So I think there is still a lot of discussion to be done to say, how can we do it? And I think we also have to go and see some initial use cases. Unfortunately, some of the early digitization efforts, not only in the Philippines, but we see that everywhere, have been not very successful. And it has a lot to do with, I think, still too much baggage of the past in terms of how do we innovate, and too much big steps. You need to make smaller steps, try to get one thing going. And there are different techniques and strategies that the bank can employ to get there. In some cases, I see people do strategies like, this is the hardest way possible to get to digital. Why don't you do it like this? Or why don't you have you thought about this? And I think a lot of sharing there can help people to get, oh, okay, is that possible? Yes, that's possible. But what about the regulators? Well, I think your regulator would be very happy if you would go digital, because they have all these aggressive targets. Don't you think that, and I think that dialogue between regulators, technology, banks, et cetera, needs to kind of become more pragmatic and say, we have to get this going and we have to take some risks. So if we look at the ABAC platform, and I'm going to stop here for a moment, but if we look at that, what we're trying to do is to really make it clear that you can start building right away and build something together. As you do that, you'll discover if it was 100% right or not. You can make quick adjustments. Some people may say, oh, I need to figure that out up front. No, you don't have to. You can start building right away. You figure out what it is. Once you have kind of, hey, this is kind of working, then you put in more capacity to make it production, right? So there's more work needed, etc. But at the initial phase should happen really, really fast. And that builds confidence for the bank and the management to say, hey, we can do this. Oh, this is how it works. Oh, that wasn't that hard. Oh, wow, these people are out there. This can actually be put together very quickly. And so that confidence building will then, get you to the last, we call it kind of the last mile. But the last mile is not the hardest bit. It is really not wasting 1 to 2 years, RFPs, proposals, what is the cheapest or whatever. It's all not relevant. You're on a big journey. And so you have, there's 40 million people to be covered. So we don't have so much time. And the mistakes that most people make are not choosing the technology or doing the technology. The mistake is spending too much time thinking about it. Because that opportunity to bring the solutions to the people in the field is really what it is all about. So I'm going to stop here and give it back to you, Quinten.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I mean, certainly a more fluid mindset, more progressive mindset allows you shorter cycle times and allows you to do an iterative approach rather than something that is overthought, rather than practiced and innovated along the way. It certainly helps. And I'm actually pretty much describing the BSP's sandbox experience in terms of looking at the innovations and seeing what works, right? So, Director Joyce, I wanted to check with you. I mean, you've been on top of this policy development and working with private sector players for these innovations. What have you seen that can really help, so to speak, move the needle towards that 70% and 50% target?
Yeah, I appreciate Peter's response earlier. It starts with, of course, there are different, we're confronting several fronts when it comes to our financial exclusion challenges. There's infrastructure challenges. We all know about the connectivity challenges. And if you want adoption, digital finance adoption, that starts with really providing internet connectivity to the unbanked, to these remote areas where most of the unbanked reside. But on the supply side, the concern of banks, I think a lot of these banks, especially the smaller banks that we are hoping to and are really well positioned and driven by mission to serve the last mile, they are unfortunately overwhelmed by the digital transformation requirements. And if there's any positive, a silver lining, we all know the silver lining to the pandemic, it's really, these smaller banks embracing and really seeing the urgency to adopt digital transformation. And they really have to also face not only for these smaller banks, the first thing is they don't have, in fact, the existing infrastructure. Some of them don't have existing infrastructure. But for other banks, it's also contending with legacy infrastructure as well as legacy culture. And smaller banks don't have access to experts, IT experts. Those are scarce and expensive, especially in the Philippines. So those are some of the challenges that they face. And for the BSP, we're trying to facilitate support for the rural banks by channeling funding from development agencies to provide rural banks and microfinance institutions serving the last mile the needed support, whether that's funding or technical assistance, to help them implement and design their digital transformation journey.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Director Joyce. And I think just as a follow-up to that question, when you talk about the last mile delivery, I mean, I've had forums before with different banks, and one of the pain points they've identified is how to empower the rural banks. That infrastructure is there in the country. Certainly, Banco Central and other central banks around the world have oversight over those rural banks, and there's been some consolidation in the sector. How can the private sector and also the regulators come in and say, look, I mean, there's a very valid role for these rural banks to come in, and how do you speed up their digitization so that they can, they can serve their publics better and still avoid this attrition that's happening in the sector? And that also goes for you, Peter, if you can answer that from a best practice perspective of what you've seen around.
Yes, again, a very good question. I'm not sure I have the perfect answer for it again, but I'll try. I just also want to reflect on what Joyce was just saying about, the reality is indeed, what does the bank have? And where is that bank and what trajectory is a big deal. So each bank has its own little story, and you can't just, one shoe fits all. Every bank that wants to go digital will have its own unique little starting point. But what kind of a interesting observation maybe is that from the way I look at things is that the bank that has nothing actually is better positioned than a bank that has something. And the reason is that legacy can be very prohibitive in doing anything because you kind of anchored into something. So banks that have very, very small infrastructure but have a vision and a need can actually leapfrog because they can just leave everything behind and start with an empty house and start populating the house rather than we have a half populated house and we don't know how to go elsewhere. On the other hand, banks that do have legacy can do the same. If we're in a growth market, as opposed to a market, if you go look in US or Europe and some more of the advanced parts of Asia, it's a sectorized market where most of the fintech is being used to create efficiency or lower cost. That's all important, but I think if we look at developing countries, it is about capacity building to get people to go and become banked. So the problem is very, very different. So a lot of the technology that people talk about is way too sophisticated actually to solve that problem, and we should not be bothered with it. We should say, can this thing be connected to ATMs? Can this thing be connected to payments? Can this thing be used to book a loan? And if it does, you're more or less sure that you're 90% going to be successful. The key is that not to get distracted by all the endless amount of doubt, is to just go build it. The current technology, it's hard to make a real big mistake in terms of doing that. And we were talking about APIs. The beauty of that is that as opposed to the mainframes where everything is custom integrated by artisans that have chiseled that over the years, the new APIs, etc., allow you to actually replace a component over time. So it's like, okay, we took this KYC application. It was great when we started. Now we need something more sophisticated. Replacing that becomes not a big decision. So in other words, don't waste too much time thinking it all through. Make sure that what you have gets you started. And then as you go, you can scale up and get more sophisticated in your thinking. So I think that is kind of an advice, for for the rural banks to say that, you know, understand, don't look at the big banks. They're very sophisticated. You don't need that, you know, but you need immediate, you know, capabilities to start booking, connecting, and doing things. And then as you engage new customers, you start to learn as to what that means and what they're talking, and then you can start to do things. But don't try to solve the whole puzzle up front, up to, you know, up to a mega bank status. So, and that would be my advice, you know, from practitioner viewpoint, that actually works. And that's kind of where AFIN is trying to, you know, as an MPO, we're basically trying to bring you the shortcut, the cheat sheet, so to speak, to do that.
Well, certainly with a digital imperative, you have to get the low-hanging fruit. More importantly, try a modular approach.
Yes.
It's enough something transfer. You don't have to turn the Queen Mary around, so to speak. Now, and Director Joyce, I mean, having, you know, seen that, you know, the Philippine financial system is only as good as its smallest players, but the rural banks themselves do have a role in the certain provinces, remote areas. And how is Bangko Sentral helping them make that step, make that leap into digitization?
Yeah. There's actually an ongoing support from a French development agency that's helping to rural banks, partnering with the Rural Bankers Association in supporting digitization efforts of the rural banks. And it's still at the conceptual stage, and this is something that BSP is also supporting. I also appreciate what Peter said about, you know, rural banks starting small and not getting overwhelmed by the whole digitization strategy. So I think for us in the BSP, it's also important that we support those conversations with rural banks and vendors, you know, helping demystify really digital solutions for rural banks. There's a lot of demystification that needs to happen. Because all these talks about fintech sometimes overwhelm, you know, smaller banks who are not really used to talking to fintechs. And so if we can have that, facilitate that productive dialogue and conversation between smaller banks, including the microfinance institutions and vendors and all these solutions that have ready solution, implementable solution for these types of institution, then that's probably one way we can support it.
Yeah, and certainly customization off the shelf type products will help, because then it lowers the friction in terms of getting that on board. Now, on that note, I did want to ask about, you know, this thing about trust. I mean, obviously, a lot of transition and migration, even if it's being pushed by this pandemic, boils down to trust. Will the vendor will an individual user want to put a digital wallet together when they're so used to having money in their hands, especially, you know, in rural areas where that is the norm. And then you also look at, you know, vendors out there who want to try this platform but are worried about, you know, how do you build these KYC systems in there? How do you make sure your credit is paid? Tell us about innovations that will allow people to overcome this trust. Is a digital ID system, you know, something that you have to wait for, or are there some interim solutions to work with as people make that journey and migrate to that journey? Peter and Director Joyce again.
Okay. Again, Quintin, I'm impressed with your questions. So for all questions, I can't perfectly answer. This is definitely a big challenge.
That's why the dialogue is here.
and you know, we're here with the central bank, and you know, and this is a very big topic, obviously. So first of all, money is a very funny thing, because, you know, we talk about cash or digital currencies or whatever, but money is inherently a trust system. The paper is just a manifestation of the trust we have between us to settle. And it has nothing to do with cash or digital or anything. First of all, you trust that your money is what it is worth. So as long as, you know, that is statement number one, right? As people using a lot of cash, of course, it is very convenient. You know, it doesn't need electricity. It's you know, once you're used to it, it works. But it also causes a lot of friction and doesn't allow a lot of things to happen quickly. Specifically with the pandemic, people need to stay at home. SMEs need to find different ways. So people are starting to see the benefit of digital money. And also, you know, money can transmit the virus and stuff like that. And so there's other things as well. So I think, first of all, you know, people have trust in it, but at the same time, they're also starting to see the limitations. And if you're a small SME, you know, initially you sell in your street, But over time, you say, the street is not big enough. So suddenly, how do I expand? And the internet is fantastic for selling stuff across the Philippines. Suddenly, you can sell something to somebody at the other side of the country. So I think, people will have to see the value of digital. And when we talk about digital IDs, etc., it's a flip side. Some people say, yeah, it's great, it's convenient. Other people say, well, what about the government? Can I, why do you want to look in my wallet? And I think there's a lot of dialogues that need to happen to build that trust, to say this is good, and it won't, it will honor your privacy and all these things. So there's a lot of dialogues that need to happen there. But I think the technologies are not necessarily the biggest the hurdle. It is definitely to get, first of all, you have to get people into a system where they can start using their money. So for many people, if you only have cash, you're not part of anything. You can't, So I think that financial inclusion, getting people to connect to their local rural bank, where they may have more trust, because they can see the branch of the bank. It kind of sounds funny, but I've done a lot of digital work. But it is very important to understand that people are trust things that are physical more that are not physical. I mean, if you pass your branch of your bank, hey, there is a branch, my money is in there, there's a person I can talk to. So it's very important when we build digital equivalents of that we say, what is the digital equivalent of that feeling that my money is there? So in my past career, when we built the first digital kind of bank in Japan, the most important thing we said is the customer must always have access to its money and must always see its money. So I can see my money and I can have access to it. So how we translated that was, you could always see it on the internet online. You could see, here's my balance, 24/7, guaranteed, I can see my money. And the second thing we made sure is that any convenience store or any street in Japan, you could go and get your money or deposit your money. So that kind of thing builds inherent trust, because that is what people worry about. Where is my money? And there, what is this virtual thing? And how can I trust this? So kind of, playing back into people's mindset that is always there. And I think Director Joyce was talking about open banking and things like that. There are very good ways to do that, because it has two main effects. One is I can aggregate my money. So I can see now all my money in one place. So I can work, I can have 2 or 3 accounts, it doesn't matter. But also I can show my money now to a lender and say, look, I may only have $100 balance, but over the last one, my cash flow is $1,000. And I have cash flow for the last 5 years is every month I make $1,000. My balance is 100. And so ability to show that builds another trust and a huge value for SMEs to say, now I can use my assets to get more lending and it can grow. And it's the biggest problem, Director Josh, you mentioned, is lending, getting that cash to flow in the society. So, know your cow is just an example I use, but it is very important for people to show what they have. And all of SMEs are actually the risk in lending to small SMEs is much smaller than larger companies. Most people don't know that. They think, oh, the risk is small SME, I don't know them. Yet because you don't know them, it doesn't mean the risk is high. It is just that you don't know. So that open data, that connecting things together is a huge value. And that value has to be shown to people over time. They have to use it, and that trust will only be built over time. You can't just say, trust me. I'm Peter, how would you trust me? We just met. No relationship, but over time you build trust. And I think that trust building is really, really essential to make digital a success.
Thanks, Peter. Transparency, accessibility, and then verifiability are certainly goals to work for. Director Joyce, I just want to add one more thing before you answer. I think some questions were also about how to inculcate this issue of security, protection, and data privacy as your regulations unfold with these innovations. Director Joyce.
Yeah. So just to also answer the issue on how do you encourage trust in or foster trust in digital payments among unbanked or newly banked. So if you look at our inclusive digital finance pillars, it's digital, but it's actually anchored on expansive access of cash in and cash out points. So that can sound counterintuitive to some, because we're saying we were promoting digital, but how come your inclusive digital finance pillar is built on cash in, cash out network? And that's part of building trust, as Peter mentioned. When we transition the unbanked from cash-based to digital payment transaction, they need to know that there's a cash out point nearby that where they can readily, cash out their digital wallet. And these cash out points are not only accessible in terms of, distance, they're also emotionally accessible for these low income individuals. They're not intimidating, unlike a formal branch where they feel they need to dress up. So for low income individuals, cash out points that can be their neighborhood retail outlets are very emotionally accessible, and that also helps build trust into the formal use of accounts. And another way that we're promoting, onboarding individuals is really supporting the promotion of compelling uses of a transaction account. So for instance, we've worked with the Department of Labor and Employment to encourage employers to use transaction accounts for payment of wages. There's a lot of wage earners in the Philippines that continue to receive their salaries through cash. So the Labor Department has already issued that advisory encouraging. So really creating that compelling use case for opening an account, and that once they have opened an account, then we ask them to use it for digital payments. And to encourage them to use it for digital payments, that also needs that we need to promote digital payments acceptance by smaller merchants. So vendors in the wet markets, the tricycle drivers. So that's part of the work that we're also doing in coordination with other government agencies. And of course, Quintin, we can't really talk about digital. We can't talk about all these financial inclusion initiatives without talking about PhilSys, the digital ID. That will really be, we think, a game changer because that will make client acquisition from the point of view of the financial service providers. That can make really client acquisition very cost efficient, and that can also lead them to tap into markets that they have traditionally ignored because of perceived cost and perceived low margin. So those are just some of the things that I wish to share on that issue.
Thank you, Dr. Joyce. I mean, I think if you think about this issue of building trust, factoring security, having people migrate towards that goal of being 70% banked is a system. I think we're certainly along that virtuous circle and network effect to get that. A lot more needs to be done, but I think with a greater interaction between the public-private sector, with the regulators, and these innovations that you're fostering under the leadership of Governor Diokno, I think we're well on our way to doing that. So with that, I would like to thank you, Peter Franken and Director Ellen Joy Sufienza. Thank you so much for your time and the robust discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our third and financial session, last session is on digital innovation for MSME development, empowering MSMEs to connect to the world. And we're going to focus on how APEC economies are working to stimulate growth in this sector, enabling MSMEs toward economic recovery and resiliency. Our first panelist for our last session is JP Soliman. He is the Vice President and Head of SME Platforms for the SME Business Banking Group of Union Bank. He leads that group that owns and drives Union Bank's various innovations on technological banking products, solutions, and services for the MSME market. JP is an expert on advising and solutioning for small and micro, as well as large enterprises in understanding, finding, and using digital banking solutions that are right for their business from a financial, operational, and technical solution standpoint. JP, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Quintin. And I'd like to say good morning to everyone who's watching us right now. And I'm very, very excited for this. I do thank ABAC for having me here, for inviting me. It's quite a very big honor for me for this one. Now, as I share my screen, I'd like to share with everyone, these are mostly the responses that Union Bank has with all those challenges that were being talked about by our first set of speakers, our second set of speakers. I'm very, very happy to note that we are all aligned in terms of this digital transformation, not just of large corporates, but even down to the very micro of industries. Now we all know this, and Director Joyce already shared with everyone. There's more than 1 million SME customers out there, and it's very, very important that we take care of them because they provide 36% of our GDP. Not just that, 99% of businesses are SMEs, and they employ 69% or even more than that of labor force in the country. But what are the key challenges that we have seen these SMEs have when we talk about digital technology, when we talk about transformations? First, the lack of budget. And this is amplified recently due to the pandemic. We've seen companies who are closing, we've seen companies losing contracts, and the budget to digitize has dwindled. There's also a very big shortage of skills, the knowledge gap in technology, as well as some cultural resistances to the changes that is happening all around us. But again, this pandemic, not just, well, it transformed people. Now there are different challenges that they're facing. The first challenge is with the lack of budget and with the lack of resources, their challenge is time. A lot of the SMEs are now saying, I have to convert, I have to digitize, I have to transform. But there's not enough time because of the limitations of the resources. Second, that they have, which was very much talked about in the second session, was trust. How do I trust this platform? And a lot of people are asking that. How do I make sure that I'm secured? My money is secured. How do I make sure my transactions are secured? And this is where we came up with multiple platforms and technologies to help the SMEs. But first things first, where do we go and who do we trust? We went to ecosystems. The SMEs at the center of every ecosystem. Every industry has a supply chain. Even the government takes care a lot of the SMEs. And during this pandemic, I'll be happy to give a shout out. The government has been very big in supporting all the initiatives that we have, particularly the Bangko Central, the Department of Trade, in terms of this transformation that we're bringing to the SME market. And this is where trust comes from. Trusting a principal, just like what Michael mentioned earlier during the first session, they call them the queen bees, right? The large corporates who are the principals of these SMEs. And that is where, once we overlay technology and once we overlay platforms, we promote higher levels of connectivity, connecting yourself as a business, connecting yourself as a person to my manufacturer, to my regulator, to my distributor. By virtue of automating all these relationships and all these experiences, we are able to provide a platform that highlights analytics, highlights data analytics and artificial intelligence that provides a little extra boost to those micro SMEs. And the digital ecosystem provides a lot of mobility. Imagine a world where anywhere you are, even lying down on your couch, you are able to do not just banking transactions, but you're able to perform operational transactions necessary for your business. One of the key platforms that we have launched recently was Union Bank Global Linker. And this is an open platform available to all kinds of MSMEs, whether you're a single proprietor, a large corporate, or even a side hustler, as a lot of these businesses are coming about. And the goal of Global Linker is to connect the SMEs to each other, not just locally, but even internationally. And highlighting in this platform, we provide immediate e-commerce enablement. Director Joyce earlier mentioned there's a huge growth in e-commerce, and a lot of businesses are pivoting to that because now they understand that the most critical journey and most critical relationship is between them and their customers. In the pandemic area, that was taken out from each and every one of us, not just on a business-to-business scale, but even on a personal level. And inside the platform, we provide immediate solutions to the customer without friction. A person who's going into e-commerce, a person who's going on a digital business-to-business relationship requires payments, and they can activate payment integrations inside. They would require logistics. They would even require knowledge. Inside the platform, we provide all these trainings, all these modules. Together with partners, we even provide business consultancy. We've partnered with lawyers, we've partnered with accountants, we've partnered with business advisors who provide free advice and free consulting to the MSMEs because that's what they need at this moment. I'll give you a use case, and this is a live use case in partnership with the government. Imagine a world where your neighborhood sari-sari store is able to sell to you on your mobile phone. And this type of facility, if you look at it, the relationship between the sari-sari store and the customer, roughly around a 2 kilometer, 3 kilometer radius, is automated. And put in the ecosystem players such as logistics. Mind you, we are not talking about Grab, we are not talking about the regular couriers, we're talking about tricycle drivers. Allowing a tricycle driver to be able to fulfill an order that you have to a sari-sari store or a mini grocery which is around 2 kilometers away. Put that and all those data, connect them to the principals or the queen bees who are normally your distribution network, your FMCGs. They could be your telcos. They could be anyone in that ecosystem, and connect the dots, connect the line through a single platform. This way, we will be able to provide better services. We will be able to provide more financial services to the customer because now we can see alternative alternative scores and alternative transactions that before are not visible to us. But there's also another problem. How do we get closer to the customer? Getting closer to the customer is important in terms of collaboration. And here's another case study that we have, a service that we have developed, a platform we have developed called I2I. This I2I platforms allows us to bring banking down to the most rural of areas. I'll be happy to say that we already are close to hitting 100 partners in this I2I platform. Imagine your sari-sari store owner, if I go back to my use case earlier, who is based in a far-flung area down in the farthest part of Mindanao, where access to formal lending services is not available. Not even access to ATMs is available to them. Enabling this platform to the microfinance cooperatives, the rural banks, brings those technology closer to the end consumer, brings financing closer to those end consumers, and brings the whole Philippines closer to them. And to make it a lot easier for our ecosystem, the SMEs, we've even digitized the journey they have in securing different types of financial services. Loans, for example, our platform, CCAP-PH, allows an SME to apply for a loan, not just from Union Bank, but from other different lenders in our marketplace by staying at home, staying in their office, even during dinner, even during a sleepless night where I need funds to pay my employees. It's all online, it's all digital, it's all there. And because of the power of technology, artificial intelligence, analytics, we are able to provide you an approval time of as fast as 1 day, sometimes even as fast as 4 hours. And all the experience and the journey that you have is all placed digitally. Now, imagine these platforms. I'm talking about them almost individually, but imagine them all being put together in one super app or in one super platform. Let's talk about automating logistics. Let's talk about automating e-commerce. And of course, your supply chain, payments, again, marketing and business matching, put them all together in one single platform. And that is the vision of what we are trying to create. That's the vision of the SME business banking, where later on in one single place, all of these platforms converge, all of these technologies converge. Through the help of our corporate partners, the government, we will be able to scale up better the SMEs, the micro SMEs, towards their digital transformation. Now to close, let me share with everyone a short video about our bank's transformation and also the services that I just described earlier. Thank you so
very
much, Quintin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, JP. And having moderated your e-talk tales, I'm really interested in terms of fleshing out more this ecosystem approach as you have platforms that help empower MSMEs more, especially from those who are beginning to make that journey towards digitalization. Now, our second panelist, Michelle Curry, is the founder and CEO of Talka Global. She has held senior executive roles in large multinational corporations, running global and regional businesses over 15 years, designing and implementing complex global transformation programs, including global restructures of multinational corporations. And through this experience and her extensive work across Asia, she has become focused on the challenges of complex reforms for the underserved populations, designing and developing technologies, tackling issues of economic and social development of the informal economy. Michelle, you have the floor. Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon, and thanks ABAC Philippines for hosting this really terrific forum. It's been fascinating to be part of it and to listen to all the previous speakers. So thanks a lot. Just to get started on my presentation, which actually you're going to see some level of resonance to the previous presentation from Union Bank that JP just delivered. And it's really great in some ways, I think, to see the convergence of this thinking from Union Bank. In fact, JP, this is probably one of the only times that I've come across another presentation that is tackling micro and small enterprise digitization and productivity and expansion from the lens of ecosystems. And also from the lens of providing these ecosystems in integrated type super digital platforms, super applications that make access easy. So I'll get into a little bit more, I guess, about why I think this convergence of thinking is quite exciting to listen to, but also just recapping some of the data that a few presentations have shown over the last couple of hours, and that really it goes to the heart of the vast number of micro and small enterprises that flourish across Asia. As you can see here, more than 90% of micro and small enterprises in the Philippines are classified as such. And it's not just a massive issue of economic and social discrepancy in not providing these populations with access to proper tools and proper services and capabilities, and the ability to migrate over time from the informality of their operations and the informality of their financial situations to be able to participate in more globalized opportunities, be beneficiaries of globalization by being able to participate formally in financial mechanisms and participate formally in supply chains and in global value chains. It's obviously a really critical point, but actually, as everyone knows, it's also a very powerful compelling commercial undertaking that is drawing the interest of the private sector, but also should be drawing the interest and I guess is of governments around the region, because obviously once you get this more formalized participation of micro small enterprises characterized as typically cash reliant, characterized as small, usually informal and often totally non-digitized, obviously you start to be able to count that in informal GDP metrics and obviously bring into formal mechanisms this flourishing population. We've published a couple of papers with ABAC Brunei across the year, and we have a few more that will be available by the end of the week, which really starts to address different aspects of why we have micro and small enterprises that represent such a massive population yet are so underserved. Traditionally have been so underserved, And I think to the point that Joyce made earlier, I guess everything has a silver lining. And to the extent that COVID-19 has provided a lot of momentum and impetus and focus on the need to protect these businesses, make them more resilient, then I guess there has been some modicum of benefit that has come out of the realization and insight that something has to be done about their vulnerability, and that is just simply not a sustainable position for all economies to sort of leave these vibrant businesses in. And so we incubated this actually prior to COVID-19, and it has been interesting to see the extent to which COVID-19 has given us momentum and pushed us forward as well. And it was really around looking at why have the issues of financial inclusion just been so difficult to tackle, and why, after so many decades of trying to address the issues of financial inclusion and change the extent of inclusivity, bring people, poor people, the underserved into financial systems, why has that been so slow? Why has the success been relatively patchy? And why during a big pandemic like COVID has so many of the gains that have been made in being able to move poverty indices actually regressed, and regressed dramatically? What is it about the fragility in all of these approaches and systems that we need to overcome? And really for us, it came back to a very, very simple thing. And that is that if you can't earn income, and if you can't secure that income, and if you can't grow that income, then the plethora of financial services that are available to you, saving services, banking services, and to be honest, the value of digitization of financial services is very low. There's not a huge motivation for you if really surviving the day is what you're all about, and certainly for those organisations that resort to informal lending at very high interest rates, then quite often the onus of those interest repayments puts you into an indebtedness cycle that makes it impossible to break out of. So you're not going to be thinking about expansion and bank accounts if what you really need to do is just to keep moving through that day and that week. And so that's why we took the approach of the super app, where we have focused on two things predominantly. One is that we really challenge that digitization is a pinpoint automation of a transaction. And in the same way that we challenge that financial inclusion is having a bank account, and that what poorer people need is access to capital-free capabilities that enable them to change their circumstances, that enable them to enter into more robust business practices, cheaper business practices, and as we keep saying, more resilient business practices. And so for us, digitization's real value is when you can integrate these capabilities and provide them to consumers in a single container, where they can choose which of those features in that container that they need today versus those features that they will learn about and potentially grow into later. But really, we need to be the ones that integrate the value and provide that value in a single super app, so that the back end aspects of running a business, of being able to do procurement, of being able to have a digital profile, of being able to do marketing campaigns, promotions and enter into probably at first hybrid e-commerce capabilities, and then later properly branded full e-commerce capabilities, both domestically and cross-border, need to be part of this resilience and digitization story, as do all of the front-end capabilities, connecting customers to, the TOCA customers to their customers, and being able to create this ecosystem, being able to create a network, and be able to have exchanges of value occurring within that ecosystem that are beyond the transaction. And that's really where we focused in terms of the development of the service and the development of the solution. But we are also, I came from a corporate background, and one that was very focused on doing global implementations of complex business challenges, and bringing that thinking to the challenge of implementation for this kind of context, I think is very important, in that digitization runs the risk of becoming just another buzzword until we get very, very serious about the fact that we have to put capabilities in the hands of all people. And previous speakers have certainly alluded to this, those people down at the very bottom of Mindanao or Palawan, and be able to provide them with different types of capabilities, whether it's in an unconnected way, whether it's on someone else's device, whether it's in some kind of a shared device, but really overcoming so much of the problem of implementation that has hounded all of us for some years. And so looking at the different kinds of sort of services we built into the app, and as I said, it's kind of exciting that that JP and I think Union Bank have gone down a similar kind of path, and that is really being able to provide the ability to plan, the ability to set goals, the ability to forward think and look at what are the possibilities of expansion, that if you start to use different services that are provided via this solution, might be game changing for you in terms of your income prospects. And providing a whole different sorts of digitized capabilities contained in an earn function, and opening up the ability to sort of integrate the back end components to the front end sales, that I think is resiliency. The default to e-commerce, I think, is a little problematic, in that I know that there has been some really fantastic attempts to move MSEs from shop fronts to e-commerce platforms. And I think that for some of those MSEs, that might be extremely powerful. But what we run the risk of, if we're not building the unique capabilities of the MSE itself, we're just essentially commoditizing their products and putting them in a blinded brand way onto flooded e-commerce platforms, then what we are really doing is running the risk of driving, basically the race to the bottom in terms of price sensitivity of buyers, and potentially not creating much resiliency or future opportunities to fair income at all. But nevertheless, I think in parallel, providing them with richer capabilities, simplified, essential, and also where there's high levels of customization that they can choose which of those things is more valuable. Focusing on the implementation is that we, working with ABAC Brunei, took this to pilot, and we were very keen to understand how this concept of the super app would play out in markets. And so we, with ABAC Brunei, selected Bimpiaga, partly because it's so challenging, and it really is that sort of last mile, for want of a better term, of consumers that that aren't sort of in metropolitan areas, and really testing the need in those more remote and rural communities for the need for this kind of super app construct, this construct of integrated value, of digitization through a motivation of income generation and income security, and also delivered through different types of devices and modalities to see what really was going to be this response. But we also took the opportunity to obviously test aspects of the platform against regulation and against sort of local constraints, and obviously also looked at where we could identify harmonization opportunities across a clustered region like Bimpiaga. So looking at opportunities to not have to reinvent the wheel cross-border as you deploy this kind of sort of super app model, which really gets to the heart of the implementation at scale issue, and moving out of small grassroots implementations where the scale, for whatever reason, doesn't necessarily happen. And we found some interesting things, obviously, and I think that the big three key things with the pilot still underway, but what we've found is that the convenience factor of the integrated capabilities that sit within the super app construct was the thing that the consumers liked the most. The idea that they don't have to figure out 30 different types of apps and try to sort of integrate the convenience for themselves, that this was basically delivered to them in a simple way, in a way that they could easily navigate, and where they could see the ability to move beyond cost-intensive processes, manually intensive, time-consuming processes, and the connectivity and ability to engage in their ecosystem was very important to them. We didn't expect the next one, which was that it was around the idea of expansion, that consumers also really liked this app. The idea that they could move out of, for example, a growth constraining, hyper competitive local contexts. They could look at supply chains, and they could look at downstream customers in much more easy ways. And then, sorry, Patrick's just trying to call me. And the third was around the no capital entry point, which obviously the enterprises like. So where we're going next is that we are going to be publishing the full report on the findings at the end of this week. We have the MVP now ready to launch, focused around MVP capabilities. We are going to look to partner economy by economy around the prospect of integrating other capabilities, for example, around the payments space, and discussions are obviously underway to pilot this in the Philippines and Indonesia. So I'll leave it there, and obviously thank you for listening to this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michelle. And it's good to see that the super app is already in minimum viable product stage. Look forward to hearing more about it as it applies to our MSMEs here. Now, our third speaker, Dr. Rafaelita Fita M. Aldaba, is the Undersecretary for Competitiveness and Innovation of the Philippine Department of Trade and Industry, or the DTI. She fulfills a key role in the formulation and the implementation of the Inclusive Innovation Industrial Strategy, or I3S, which puts innovation at the heart of the country's new industrial policy. Undersecretary Aldaba is also a member of the Board of Governors of the Philippine Board of Investments, or BOI, the country's primary industry development arm and lead investment promotion agency, or IPA. Dr. Aldaba, Undersecretary Aldaba, welcome and good morning.
Well, good morning, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Well, it's really a pleasure to join today's discussion on digital innovation and the ecosystem, particularly focusing on connecting communities and empowering MSMEs. Prior to the crisis, we were already witnessing the entry of Industry 4.0 technologies. And so now more than ever, we realize the importance of adopting these new technologies. So earlier, we've been talking a lot about the financial sector. So now in my discussions, we will be moving towards the real sector, particularly the manufacturing sector. And the main issue that I'd like to address in this presentation is, are Philippine companies, MSMEs in particular, prepared to adopt these new technologies? I will be sharing with you the highlights of a technology utilization survey that we conducted to help us understand the Industry 4.0 readiness of our firms and industries. So in here, you can see the various dimensions, technology dimensions that the survey has assessed. These are planning and scheduling. These are the operations of a manufacturing company. Manufacturing activity management, equipment connectivity and data management, material management and handling, equipment maintenance, quality, shop floor visibility, and cybersecurity. Okay, so for each dimension, the companies were asked to rate themselves based on the following levels. You get a score of 0 if your operation is still purely manual, meaning the company has no technology utilization. It gets a score of 1 if it is still using low-tech spreadsheet management like Excel. So the company has a very low technology utilization. Then it gets a score of 2 if it has a standalone database management system with some legacy applications. A score of 3 is given if it is still applying manufacturing execution system. And that means it is a high-tech utilization. And level 4, if it has MES plus technologies like Internet of Things, big data, machine learning, robotics, AI, 3D printing, cloud computing, and so on. Here are the results. A total of 144 companies responded to the survey out of the we distributed over 1,000 all over the country, and 47% of the respondents were MSMEs. And as you can see on the slide, the bulk of the company respondents are still in level 1, which means very low tech utilization, and level 2 or low level of technology utilization. In here, you can see that, so we look at the results for the different enterprises. For micro, as you can see on the slide, 65% are still in level 1. For small, 38% are still in level 2. And for medium, 67% are in level 1. And for large companies, the bulk, or 48%, are still in level 2. And looking at the different scores per dimension, we see in here that the highest scores were actually in cybersecurity, in quality, and manufacturing activity management. The lowest were found in equipment maintenance, equipment connectivity, and data management. Now, the survey also showed that it's the large enterprises that have the highest scores, and as expected, the micro and small enterprises have the lowest. And in terms of geographic distribution, the highest technology utilization is still in NCR, in Region 3 and Region 4A, which actually these three regions comprise the bulk of our GDP. Of course, what this implies is that if this trend continues, digital divide may widen, especially given the existing regional economic imbalances in the country. And we also asked the companies what their primary considerations were for adopting Industry 4.0. And the most important are improvement in productivity and competitiveness, the cost of the investment, along with innovation and technological advancement. And in terms of the constraints, well, before I go into that, let me just point this out. When we ask the different enterprises with respect to their awareness, with respect to their familiarity with Industry 4.0 technologies, you can see in here that the scores are really on the high side. Like 77% of micro enterprises are familiar and are open with Industry 4.0. 67% of SMEs are also very familiar with Industry 4.0. But looking at our previous results, which shows really very low technology utilization, this question would give us the reason why only a few are adopting Industry 4.0 technologies. And the top barriers that they mentioned, number one is the lack of financial capability. And then, of course, existing market conditions, lack of skills, knowledge, and expertise, and poor digital infrastructure were the top constraints affecting their Industry 4.0 transformation. Now, let me also give a picture of the current MSME landscape. As you can see on the slide, MSMEs comprise 99.5% of total establishments in the country, which is a total of about 1 million. Their contribution to GDP is around 36% and 63.2% to total employment. And as you can see also from the chart, 46.3% of MSMEs are actually in wholesale and retail, 14.5% in accommodation and food service, and 11.7% in manufacturing. So you can just imagine the impact of the crisis on our MSME sector. Now, so in view of all this, DTI has been preparing Industry 4.0 readiness initiatives to support our MSMEs as they pursue digital transformation. We are working with UNIDO in crafting Industry 4.0 roadmaps for 4 industries. We are also conducting a feasibility study for the establishment of an Industry 4.0 pilot factory together with an SME academy that would provide Industry 4.0 trainings to MSMEs. But of course, it would also be open to large enterprises. We are also formulating an artificial intelligence roadmap to make the Philippines an AI center of excellence. And we're working with AIM on this. And together with the DOLE and TESDA, we are formulating an Industry 4.0 human resource development roadmap. I'm not sure if Michael is still here, but we're working together. We signed an MOU last year with Skills Future Singapore, and we're working with them in developing the Philippine Skills Framework, benchmarking on the Singapore Skills Framework, and through the use of this, Philippine Skills Framework development, we'll be able to identify what sectors would be in demand, and hence, of course, part of this would be identifying what the in-demand skills would be in the very near future. And knowing what these skills are, we will be designing training programs. And we're also working together with, apart from SSG, they brought in another Singapore institute, the Institute of Technical Education, which is like the counterpart of our TESDA. Okay. We are also planning to implement a program that would provide fiscal and non-fiscal support to MSMEs and large companies that are transitioning from analog to digital technologies. So DTI, in terms of e-commerce activities, we have been intensifying our efforts to help our MSMEs shift to digital platforms and e-commerce through our Buy Local, Go Local campaign that would support Filipino-made products, and also by providing skills trainings on e-commerce. So to conclude, there are 4 points that I want to highlight. The first is our current strategy, which we call IQS, or Inclusive Innovation Industrial Strategy, focuses on embracing Industry 4.0. Through the use and adoption of new technologies, we can strengthen the competitiveness and sustainability and resilience of our industries. Second, companies, of course, they need to innovate, they need to integrate into digital economy and form industry clusters and pursue global collaboration. Third, the academe and training providers need to adapt their programs to meet the demand for talent that would be created by Industry 4.0. And lastly, we are strengthening government, academe, industry collaboration to address the challenges and make the most of the advantages brought about by these technological developments. And as we shift towards Industry 4.0, we need to ensure that no enterprise, no worker, no region is left behind. We do not want the adoption of new technologies to widen the digital divide in the country. And let us all work together in investing in human capital and rethinking transition support for our enterprises and workers. Thank you. And back to you, Quintin.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Aldaba, and appreciate all the panels for your presentations. I really do think that we're going to have a robust discussion ahead. I have a few questions in mind, but before that, let me just paint the situation analysis for everybody in terms of where we're trying to, which pain points we're trying to solve, right? So if you really look at the statistics building on what Dr. Fita was saying, 99.5% of registered enterprises in the Philippines are MSMEs. And yet, based on my research, they only contribute to a third of GDP and 20% or a fifth of exports. Then you look at the current situation we're in, as one of the panelists mentioned earlier, 66% have had zero sales in the last 6 months, and 60% have stopped operations. That's an imperative of the pandemic. So given that convergence of red flags, what is it going to take to move the needle in terms of getting people to adopt this super app, for example, that Michelle's talking about, or getting to the ecosystem and the suite of tools that Union Bank and other people are doing? What do you think is going to help build that trust for them to make that leap? Like, I'll ask the question to all three of you. Maybe we can start with JP.
Hi, Tim. Thank you.
Sure,
yeah,
great.
thank you for that. Now, what will really move the needle? It was being discussed earlier. The trust factor is one way that we can move the needle. Familiarity is trust. If others might view it differently, then it's okay. But if we are able to connect, again, like I mentioned earlier, the ecosystems, the principals, the players that the SME is more trustful of, and they are the ones who also promote the inclusivity to digital and to technology. That's where the first set of acceptance into moving into that platform, and that will really move the needle a lot. Second, for me, is the user experience and the journey. Like what we are doing now, we try to understand deeply, even to the point of a single person, how they would like to experience technology, how would they like to experience platforms, even to the point that if we have to recreate a Facebook journey, if we have to recreate a Viber type journey, then so be it, because that is how the customers will accept the different technologies. And that, again, will definitely move the needle. Lastly, for us, what we believe is invisible banking. People, MSMEs, when you talk about banking, it's all suddenly very rocket science for them. And it was mentioned earlier, even by Director Joyce of BSP, that people are afraid of going into banks. Right? They are more confident in going to the local pawn shop, the local grocery, to do a banking transaction. But if we are able to put invisible banking inside different platforms, like maybe what Michelle has, what Director Fita is doing right now, and then they won't even know that they're already banking. And to do that, we have to have this open mentality of allowing different technologies to bond together, to have that inclusivity of technology, so we can promote that financial inclusion, even without the customer really knowing it, that they are already banking. Those three, I believe, would move the needle so much, especially for the Philippines.
Thank you, JP. And Michelle, on your point, really, because your research does have to do with migrating from the informal to the formal sectors, it's going to be quite critical as well. Please.
I think that JP hit the nail on the head. People will try things that they value, and trust will come through applied experience of having these capabilities in their hands and being able to mature their understanding of their value. And so I think moving the dial has to come to less theory and more implementation, more trials in the field, and getting more of that user engagement and creating the ecosystem of kind of joy that would come from being able to not only be better connected within your ecosystem, but also to be able to see how that might correspond to better, easier, and more secure ways to generate your income.
Thanks, Michelle. And Dr. Vita?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think based on what I've already presented earlier, government support, government intervention is really needed, especially under these circumstances. And our industrial policy is actually being geared towards embracing these new technologies. And it's going to be the IQS that I've also mentioned, the Inclusive Innovation Industrial Strategy. The focus of this is really towards making our industries more innovative, more globally competitive. And through the introduction, through the adoption of these new technologies like AI, for example, 3D printing, cloud computing, etc., we will be able to create new products. Our industries would become more innovative. New services could be offered. And especially if we're able to adjust our processes as well, taking into account all these new technologies and move from the analog towards the more digital technologies, having being able to build smart factories. I think all of this would be crucial in terms of our goal, which is really to promote and be able to industrialize as well as to promote highly competitive and productive industries. And also this is aligned with our goal towards building more sustainable and a more resilient development. And again, crucial elements in order for us to realize this would be government support towards providing more human resource development, making our MSMEs and our startups more innovative, linking the innovation ecosystem with the entrepreneurship ecosystem, the ease of doing business. Again, we cannot overemphasize its importance, but yet, I mean, there's still so much that we can do in terms of improving ease of doing business in the country. And of course, also focusing on innovation, accelerating the commercialization of research. I think we really need to gear ourselves towards these new technologies and towards more innovative practices and ensure that we're able to link together entrepreneurship with innovation.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Vita. And I just note the DTI's interventions even of late, like for example, helping SMEs provide for their 13th month pay obligations, which are coming up, and also at the same time, you've got Kubo and the other hubs there that actually promote public-private partnerships for startup innovation. So that's great to look at. Now, speaking of innovation, I mean, one thing to look at with an MSME, just drowning in terms of obligations, and at the same time, with cash flows being restrictive, at the same, and also dealing with their attrition and pivoting their workforce. How do you get, like for example, Michelle, that super app, to convince them that they can try this out? It's a one-stop shop, but how do you get them to look at the low-hanging fruit and say, you should try this one, and later on they will grow into that usage as well? I mean, it's the same question I'd ask JP and also with Vita for the other innovations that you have. Michelle, go ahead.
Well, so, I mean, it's always a really interesting question because it's one that we get a lot, right? And I think that there is a lot of assumption that the non-digitized MSEs or even their consumers who tend not to be digitized actually don't understand the value of some of these capabilities, and they have access to digital capabilities because they can see their children using it, or they can see people broader. They can see, you know, socially the move towards these sorts of capabilities. But often they actually just don't believe that they will be able to avail themselves of these capabilities, that it won't come to them. And we've got real life experience, not in the Philippines, but in other economies, of taking this concept into those economies, believing that what we will get back is that people won't want to use it. And actually, quite often we get the reverse. I mean, I'm not trying to say that there isn't reticence and there aren't trust issues and that there aren't tech savviness in being able to sort of fully embrace its opportunities. But I do believe that there is more willingness to look at its potential. And I think that if we can put valuable capabilities that make it convenient and easy to use, where the story of opportunity and expansion is very tightly integrated in the value proposition that we share, that while I'm not saying that the uptake won't be a journey, I am saying that I think that perhaps we overthink what some of the barriers might be to that uptake. So it will be a case-by-case basis, but I really also believe that, you know, we can't kind of go into this with the view that no one's going to want it and this is going to be a hurdle. I mean, any change program is tough. This is a stakeholder market, and we've got to orchestrate the appetite of that market to buy into the change that we want to bring, and that's just programmatic, right?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And then, you know, I think one thing you and JP share as well is the idea that you use design thinking to understand what the pain points are anyway, so it becomes very resonant to the user, even if they have to try it on an ad hoc basis. I think it will get them into the system sooner rather than later. So JP, I know you've got a suite of tools, the acquisitions are going, in-house development's going on. We've seen that with Union Bank. What else are we looking at in terms of getting more people, you know, into that ecosystem?
So again, going back to the points where it's at the end of the day, the consumer and the person who really onboards, right? So what we try to achieve in terms of getting them onboarded really is more on the experience, and some might even call it lifestyle, right? Now, technology prior to pandemic and even years ago, this has been a very big buzzword. Technology is a disruptor. Everyone is talking about it as being a disruptor. But then again, back then, it is truly a disruptor because number one, it's expensive. It's time consuming to implement. Now, technology is becoming an enabler. And once you become an enabler, you are able to provide further benefits to the end user. Imagine an SME who before will say, no formal lender would like to lend to me. No one. And there's a lot of them, right? But now, because they are onboarding to a new platform and they are by themselves trying to understand and getting themselves used to these platforms, immediately you can say, now you can borrow from a formal lender. And those are the kinds of benefits that will entice people to onboard. Those are the benefits that will make them engage and use drastically the platforms that we are offering. And again, it's no longer disruptive. We have to look at it as enabling, more of an enabling technology.
Thanks, JP. And Fida, from your interaction with the private sector, what have you seen in terms of, you know, really enticing them to take this step, and how attractive it can be, especially with the innovations you've seen with the private sector and your regulations also?
Mm-hmm, yeah. Well, I'm looking at the results of the survey, which, by the way, we conducted around third quarter and the last quarter of last year. So this was done prior to the pandemic. And when we ask the companies whether they are familiar with this new technologies and whether they are open to adopting these new technologies, if you recall, 77% of the micro enterprises said, yes, we are familiar and we are open. 67% of the SMEs are also familiar and are open to the adoption of these new technologies. And to me, these are really very encouraging figures. And hence what we're focusing on right now is really towards addressing the barriers that are preventing them from adopting these new technologies. And as the survey also showed, it's their financial capability. And of course, while they would want to invest, but of course, we are talking about MSMEs, and as we know, access to capital, access to finances, it is still one major constraint preventing their growth and development. Of course, other reasons would be pertaining to the conditions of the market, whether they would be able to sell their products even after they've invested and adopted these new technologies. But at the same time, another problem is, of course, lack of skills, knowledge, and expertise. And hence, we really need to be able to provide more human resource development programs that would enable and capacitate our SMEs and their workers. And they also mentioned, of course, poor digital infrastructure. And in here, we're not talking about Metro Manila. We're not talking about just NCR and Calabarzon and Region 3, but our survey reached companies as far as Mindanao. So it was conducted all over the country, and it's pretty well represented. And hence, we need to government has to step in and be able to share in the answer. There are uncertainties and there are risks that would be involved in terms of investing in these new technologies. And through government programs, we'll be able to share in terms of addressing these uncertainties and risks. That's why I keep saying we really need government to step in, government to intervene in terms of providing all this necessary support in order to make our MSMEs, even including our large enterprises as well, they would be needing help. It's not just the MSMEs that we are gearing our programs for, but it's for all the enterprises in the country. We'd like to provide this support. Number one would be the Industry 4.0 pilot factory that would really help us because I've seen a lot of countries, they have this already. Singapore, for instance, well, we've been asking Singapore to support us in this particular initiative as well, and link it with the training programs that we are conceptualizing. So in other countries, Taiwan, Korea, everyone has this Industry 4.0 pilot factories, which they are really using to train their workers. But at the same time, it could also be used by companies that are making prototypes, companies that are making new products. So if you have this facility, really, it's something really that would be very useful. What we envision is for us to have this shared facility, and everyone is welcome to make use of it. It's not only for trainings, but as well as for helping companies that are innovating and make their prototypes in that pilot factory.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Fida. And I really appreciate, especially the government creating a conducive environment and being a catalyst in terms of that pilot, the manufacturing plant. Now, owing to the demands of the times, but at the same time, the theme of this panel, we tend to overlook the idea that the APEC economy is still set for integration. I mean, it's been stalled quite a bit. People are focusing hyper-local because of logistical constraints and market constraints. But at the end of the day, this is going to be an internationalizing economy. The Philippines also has firms that are trying to go internationally, and MSMEs among them. So the key question for three of you is, for each of you, is how do we now gear up, especially with this Industry 4.0, tech-enabled industries, to be more globally competitive as the wheels of the global economy are set to start moving again in 2021, and trade integration is going to happen. APEC members' economies are going to trade more. ASEAN is going to do more integration in 2025 with the Kuala Lumpur Declaration. How do we gear up Philippine or other industries to really compete globally, especially as the economy improves? So I'll go with JP again, then Michelle, and then we'll take Dr. Fida.
All right. Honestly, there's a lot of things being done, especially by the Department of Trade in terms of knowledge and in terms of training. They do have a lot of programs preparing SMEs for the global scenario, like KMME programs, webinars, seminars, left and right, right? Now, aside from learning and knowing what you need to do to be able to be ready for the global market, another thing that we are helping on is getting them to that market, right? I mean, if you do not have access to those markets, then all the knowledge that you have suddenly is irrelevant, right? So we provide also avenues for them to be able to network, for them to be able to connect to countries where we have trade corridors with, like Singapore, India, and so on and so forth. And we provide as well technology that enables not just knowing them or getting in touch with them, but provide you that avenue to actually make a transaction. Now, in the event that the SME or the business is not yet ready, because there's a lot of things, there's licensing, there's certifications and approvals that you need to have. We again bring in other members of the ecosystem who will be able to help you on that space. So in fact, as of this moment, if I am a business owner and I have, for example, an order for a large set of coffee beans coming from, say, Vietnam, coming from Indonesia or other parts of APEC, right? And I'm not ready to export, but there's the quick opportunity right now for me. There are people in that ecosystem, in our platforms, that will be able to assist you to get the service through. Even if right now, if you look in the olden days, you are not ready to do the exporting, but now in the digital space, whatever level you're in, you will be able to ready through partnerships that we will enable for you.
Okay, great, JB. Thank you very much. And Dr. Fita, please.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important for us or for companies to innovate, and government has programs that would help them pursue more innovation, integrate into the digital economy. And again, there are programs that we've lined up to address this particular measure. And then we need to form more industry clusters. I think this is related to what JP was saying. And apart from that, of course, global collaboration would really be very important. And APEC, for instance, could be one major vehicle that we can use. But at the same time, we have our existing free trade agreements. We have the ASEAN, we have the ASEAN +6 and the RCEP, and of course, the bilateral FTAs that we have with Japan, as well as with the EFTA countries. And then while we don't have formal bilaterals with other countries, but we do have through DTI, we have what we call the Joint Economic Committee, and we have this with Taiwan, with Korea, as well as with some countries like Germany. And we're working together with them in terms of bringing the products of Filipino companies, linking our small and medium enterprises, as well as our startups, linking them with the innovation and the entrepreneurship ecosystems in these different countries. Hence, I think, yeah, there's so much really that we can do together, and hence it's the approach that we have is really towards more government, more academe and industry collaboration. We really need to work together in order to survive this pandemic, and at the same time face the new normal, the new digital future together.
Thank you, Dr. Fita. Michelle?
Well, so obviously Fita and JP are absolutely right. And so I'm going to sort of focus the answer on the micro and small enterprise, which is the segment that we have specifically targeted. And the idea that you can't get a micro enterprise today to all of a sudden be ready to participate in even perhaps domestic supply chains or value chains, let alone global ones, but through partnering and through providing sort of local clusters that control supply and demand and remove risk from the smaller enterprises. That is surely one way to start the opportunity for micro and small enterprises to participate in global trade. But coming back to some of the comments that I made earlier around the Bimpiaga pilot and the pilot with we've done in collaboration with ABAC Brunei. I'm a great believer that you take a concept and you trial it, and the Bimpiaga councils have great programs in place that would actually potentially enable a pilot of exactly this kind of cross-border collaboration from a micro and small enterprise perspective. And I think that, and going to some of Fida's comments about the role of government, I think it does come down to these multi-coalitions of stakeholders who need to be engaged, committed and incentivized to stay the course while we actually make the wheels of this big machine turn in the right kinds of way that they need to. So, and I'm there and I'm all for it. So.
Okay, to our panelists, thank you very much. As this is the last panel, it also is an opportunity to wrap things up and weave things together. So short of Bill doing that for us, I just wanted to say, this ecosystem approach that you've been propounding here has been helpful. I mean, it's organic, adaptive, scalable, very impactful and inclusive. And that's certainly an approach you want to do, whether it be somebody getting into an app for the first time, or at the same time, people growing in the service so they can be part of this digital economy. But I'd also like to see personally as a citizen and a member of the ABAC economy is that, those figures that we have, whereas MSMEs only occupy around a fifth of the exports, I'd like to see that grow with that collaboration. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, when you look at just being contributing about a third of GDP, it'll be great to see the smaller players get a larger piece of the pie as well. And I think with these innovations and public-private partnerships, this will truly happen for good. So with that, with all the panelists, thank you very much, Michelle, Dr. Fita, and JP. Appreciate it. Have a nice day. Great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a wonderful set of discussions, robust discourse for sure, a lot of action items and concrete takeaway points. And that we've covered many relevant issues. But the key takeaways will be synthesized by none other than our ABAC member and a good friend, Bill Luz. Bill?
Thank you. Thank you, Quintin. Well, first, it's been a very enriching discussion all morning. All three panels have really captivated captured our imagination and our attention throughout the morning. Let me just maybe highlight a few sort of insights and thoughts moving forward from all this great discussion this morning. The first point is that this technology disruption and the need for digital innovation has been with us even pre-COVID. I think what's happened is that COVID accelerated the pace by which we have to move into more digital innovation. The second is that this change is going to be permanent, and it's most likely going to come at us faster than ever simply because the problem is so critical in terms of that COVID will be with us for a while, and I think it's going to force upon change, and we're going to have to accelerate all our pace, just as we have seen through the last 7 or 8 months across all businesses. Having said that, I think our big challenge is how to make this all inclusive and accessible. Trust is important, as already emphasized earlier, but the key here is how to make this inclusive and accessible. Otherwise, we run the risk of creating even a bigger divide and a bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots. I think it's worth reminding ourselves that through the last 10 years of global growth, actually, we've had sort of, in some instances, a greater gap between the haves and the have-nots. And even during this COVID period, there have been great gaps between the haves and the have-nots. So I think that with all the technology and all the digital innovation that is available to people, not everyone can take advantage of it. What's also been stressed a lot, the fourth point, is that we need stronger government industry collaboration or public-private partnerships. In a different sense, what we also need is a good relationship between the regulator and the regulated. And I think there's got to be a real appreciation of how to allow people to adapt technology and adapt change without being overly regulated. And, oftentimes we talk about digital innovation is something that all businesses should be doing, but surely it cannot be limited to businesses. I think government can make use of digital innovation. And I noticed a question in the Q&A box about ease of doing business. And this is a favorite topic for Yusek Fita and myself because, we're always grappling with this challenge. Many of our rules and regulations and permitting process are analog, and we'd love to be able to apply some technology and digital innovation and use it for ease of doing business because I think that's where we can make a big change. Uh, at the end of the day, we are not just transforming a business or a set of businesses. We are actually attempting to transform an economy. And I think it's a far greater challenge than just transforming a business, which is difficult enough in itself. So moving forward, we need to think about how do we use digital innovation to transform an entire economy, and that's a big challenge for us here in the Philippines. Let me close just first of all by thanking all our speakers today. You were excellent. Vladimir, Michael, Lito, Joyce, Peter, JP, Michelle, and Yusek Fita. Thanks so much to all of you. A special thanks as well to our moderator who handled all the panels really well today. Quintin always does a great job moderating and asking all the right questions. So Quintin, thanks very much. Also, my special thanks to Aboitiz and to Globe for helping us organize this. Aboitiz for really helping us shape the agenda and the content behind these discussions today, and Globe for the technology and the Zoom platform and managing all this process for us. Uh, this will be our last forum for 2020, as already mentioned. This is our third. Our ABAC meetings will continue because we still have uh, the APEC CEO dialogues a little later on in November, and we have various recommendations we still need to deliver to the APEC leaders and the APEC ministers, of which we do about 6 to 8 recommendations to different ministries or groups of ministries every year. So that'll keep us busy the rest of the way this year. We'll be back next year with more ABAC forums, different topics in 2021. We look forward to welcoming you back there. And on behalf of the ABAC Philippines team, Tommy Alcantara, Sabina Boites, Joan De Asis, Francis Chua, and myself, and the staff, thanks for joining us today. It's been a great morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. And on that note, we did start and end with a clarion call. There's a lot of action items to be done, and we certainly have a road back. Now it's time to build a road, building it together where all stakeholders can contribute and also benefit from it. So with that, I would like to, on behalf of ABAC team, we'd like to thank all our panelists, Bill for closing this very well, and for sharing the expertise and insights. I believe everyone will agree that the session has been a fitting year-end session for ABAC Philippines. Thank you as well to all who participated in this morning's discussion. We look forward to see you again in future activities. May I ask again that you please fill out the feedback form that you will get as soon as you exit the webinar. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much.